Welcome to this licensing subcommittee. Before I start the meeting, I'd like to remind everyone present this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet or filmed and will be capable of repeated viewing or another use by such third parties. If you are seated in the lower public seating area, it's likely that the recording cameras will capture your image, and this will result in the possibility that your image will become part of the broadcast. This may infringe your human and data protection rights, and if you wish to avoid this, you should move to the upper public gallery. First of all, the apologies for absence, we have none. Declaration of interest. None of us have an interest, I don't think. Now, a few introductions before we go any further. My name is Councillor Richard Morgan. I'm chairman of the panel for today. We have Councillor Paul Kester on my left and Councillor Alan Larn on my right, who are the three members who will be deciding on the application. We also have Councillor Ken Williamson, who is observing the procedures of the meeting today. Now, we'll start off with, for the legal department, we have Graham Oakley, and on the left is Adrian Henry from Democratic Services. And we have Steve up the end there doing the webcasting. Now, I know some of you there. First of all, we've got Handam Imran, who is our licensing officer, who is partly to deal with the case today. We have David King, who is our licensing manager. Louise Coney, are you taking part today, Louise? No, just observing. And then we've got Nikki Glasgow, who is environmental officer, so who will be taking part today. We also have 5 members of our licensing department there who will just be observing. Now, I've got a list of people who I know might be here or might be speaking. I will just read those out, and if you say you are here, then I'll know where we are. Gary Grant, who is Barrett. I'm here. Thank you, Gary. And you're representing some of the... Well, I've got... you're representing Dee Wood, Patricia Hudson, Chris Turner, Lee Saggers, Carrie Ann Connor, residents who have submitted representation in the report of review. Yes, it's my best line. Thank you. Right. We also have Dee Wood. Oh, right, thank you, Dee. Patricia Hudson. She's not here today. She won't be coming, right? Chris Turner. Also not here. Right. Lee Saggers. Right, thank you, Lee. Carrie Ann Connor. Right. Andy Newman. Representing the licensing agent for the Gardens Arms.
Yes, Councillor.
Right, okay. Patricia Roberts? There? Okay. Tracy Roberts? Laura Walker? Duncan Craig? And you are barrister for the Gardens Arms? Charlie Carroll? All right. Judith Walker?
Yes, over there.
Oh, well, I was back there. Thank you, Judith. Peter Spratt? Right. Kelsey Essex Police. I don't know if they were upstairs. Oh, yeah, okay.
She sends her apologies, she won't be attending.
Okay, that's fine. Chris Howell? And Chris Rainham? No? Right. We also, I should have introduced earlier, Councillor Chris Pond, who is representing the residents as well.
Not exactly chairman. But I'm here.
Representing himself.
Representing yourself, all right.
As an interested party is Councillor for Loughton Central. And I've also been asked to keep a watching brief for Loughton Town Council.
Okay, Thank you very much, Councillor Pond.
Chairman, on my copy, I have got an Adrian Mitchell handwritten in as in support of the premises. It says there's.
Oh, there we are. Okay, thank you. Is there anybody I missed who wants to speak?
Chair, I'm Glenn Martin, I'm 97 York Hill. I've been asked to read a statement on behalf of the Hills Amenity Society.
Okay. Yes, when you, I did ask for everybody, when you speak, please press on your microphone, and then,
Jennings at the back. Ready for Jennings.
so they're going to speak.
Do you want to make no? They're not speaking.
At the back we have Judith and Bob Jennings, who are, you're not going to speak, Councillor Jennings? He's here to observe.
I beg your pardon, Chairman. No, I will not be speaking this
Okay,
morning.
thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Right, I think we're there, aren't we? Right, good. So, procedure for the conduct of business is on page 5 to 12. It's a little bit different to what we normally do. I think we're going to, I'll ask Adrian just to remind me of which order we're doing it in, please.
It was the environmental people who brought this through, so they should be starting it off.
Okay. Just Dave King, do you want to start off by introducing anything first? Or leave it to the environmental?
Chair, if you're happy, I'll introduce the report. Are you happy for me to do so now?
Okay.
Yeah, okay. So, Chair, the Community Resilience Team at Epping Forest District Council have applied for the review of the premise licence in respect of the Gardener's Arms, 103 York Hill, Loughton. The application was submitted on the 25th of February and relates to the prevention of public nuisance licensing objective. The grounds for the review are set out in the application and supporting documents attached to the report. The application is seeking to add the following conditions to the premises licence. No music to be played outside. Outside areas to be cleared of customers by 9 p.m. After 9 p.m, people only to be outside for smoking and limited to a maximum of 6 people outside at any one time. A written dispersal policy shall be in place and implemented at the premises to move customers from the premises and the immediate vicinity in such a way as to cause minimum disturbance or nuisance to neighbours. The dispersal policy must be agreed in writing with the Community Resilience Team and subject to regular review, minimum 6 monthly intervals. Members of staff are to ask customers sat on the terrace area who are excessively loud, shouting, yelling or screaming to be mindful of neighbouring residential properties. Signage to be displayed at the exits to the premises and external areas asking customers to be considerate of residents and to keep nuisance to a minimum. The review application also sought to remove Ms Tracy Roberts as a designated premises supervisor. However, the licensing subcommittee are advised that subsequent to the application for the review being submitted, the licensing authority received an application to vary the designated premises supervisor. This application has been granted and the designated premises supervisor is now Laura Walker. The subcommittee may also wish to note that the licensing agent instructed on behalf of the licence holder has previously confirmed his client's willingness to formally accept all of the conditions proposed in the review application. On receipt, a copy of the application for review was served on the holder of the premises licence and all responsible authorities. The application was also advertised as required under the Licensing Act 2003, thereby inviting representations to be made by responsible authorities and interested parties. During the consultation period, the Council's licensing team has received representations in support of the review from Councillor Chris Pond, Loughton Town Council, Loughton Residents Association Plans Group and 15 local residents. We have also received 23 representations from local residents in support of the premises and an online petition in support of the premises has been organised by the new designated premises supervisor, Laura Walker. The petition has approximately 2,600 signatures, but we've unfortunately been unable to obtain a hard copy of the petition. However, the link is included in the email attached to the report dated the 24th of March. In addition, the Council has received a representation from Goschalk Solicitors on behalf of their client, the EI Group Limited. The EI Group Limited are the freehold owners of the premises and own approximately 4,000 public houses in England and Wales, the majority of which operate on a lease or tenancy agreement. The Gardeners Arms is subject to a tenancy in favour of Miss Tracy Roberts, who has been operating these premises under tenancy since June 1991. The tenancy agreement makes it clear that all operational responsibility for the premises lies with the tenant. Whilst the EI Group Limited have taken a neutral stance with regards to the review, their representation is that the licensing objectives would be promoted by the imposition of some or all of the conditions detailed by the Environmental Services. Copies of all the representations can be found attached to the report. After giving due consideration to the application for the review, including the grounds for the review and the information provided within it, together with any representations received, and after taking into account the views of the premise licence holder, and after giving due regard to the Council's own statement of licensing policy, the committee is respectfully asked to determine whether to modify the conditions of the premises licence and or attach new conditions, exclude from the licence a licensable activity, remove the designated premises supervisor, suspend the licence for a period not exceeding 3 months, revoke the licence, or to leave the licence in it as is, in its existing state. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Now I think it's Nikki Glasgow, if you give your presentation to the panel, please. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, I'm an Environmental Enforcement Officer as part of the Council's Community Resilience Team, and I've been in this role for 9 years. Environmental Enforcement Officers deal with the investigation into noise complaints. We also provide an out-of-hours noise service. The out-of-hours noise service is very much centred around responding to ongoing complaints, and anything witnessed by officers will be dealt with the following working day. In addition, we also deal with licensing enforcement. We consider any licence applications under the objective the prevention of public nuisance. It is common for us to recommend conditions to be added to applications that we feel will minimise noise for anyone in the immediate vicinity. When receiving complaints regarding noise, we will actively engage with premises and give advice on how to control the situation prior to any formal action being taken. The Gardeners Arms is situated at the top of York Hill, Loughton, and is surrounded by residential properties. In 2017, the premises were served with a noise abatement notice to cover music and amplified sound. This was after complaints were received regarding bands playing on the terrace area. The noise was witnessed by an officer out of hours, and it was deemed to be causing a statutory nuisance. After this, we received minimal noise complaints. In 2020, we started to notice an increase in the noise complaints received. This was alongside a number of allegations regarding antisocial behaviour from customers at the premises. The premises licence was previously grandfathered over from the Licensing Act 1964. There were no conditions on the licence that we could look at enforcing to improve matters. A visit was carried out by an officer out of hours on the 31st of July 2020. Some of the observations made were a large amount of young adults, some appeared under 18, sat on tables outside the premises. People stood in the road in large groups, blocking any cars from passing, blocking access to residential driveways. From the garden of a complainant's property, lots of people, noise and shouting was audible. No social distancing was adhered. Bearing in mind COVID restrictions were very much in place at this time. These concerns from the officer were also raised with Essex Police on the night in question. To try to bring some control to the situation, on the basis of what had been witnessed, we took the decision to serve a community protection warning under the Antisocial Behaviour, Crime and Policing Act 2014. This is something that can be served when we are satisfied that the conduct is having a detrimental effect of a persistent and continuing nature on those in the locality. The CPW was served on the 7th of August 2020. It was personally hand-delivered by myself and another colleague, along with officers from Essex Police. A lengthy meeting was held at the time when we explained the conditions and what the premises needed to do to comply. However, In the months that followed, we saw complaints continued, with 26 recorded for the remainder of August and 19 in September. We agreed to a meeting at the premises whereby we could discuss our concerns in the hope of improving the situation. We advised at this meeting that if we did not see any improvement, then ultimately we would have to look at reviewing the premises licence. To try and prevent this, we agreed a number of conditions with the premises. They stated they would apply for a minor variation. The minor variation was granted in October 2020 and conditions were added to the premises licence. The main conditions for the outside area were that the area is cleared of customers after 10 p.m, and that after this time, people are only allowed outside to smoke, but there must be no drinks taken outside. 2021 started with COVID restrictions once more. From April, when premises were permitted to trade again, we immediately started to receive noise complaints. I again attended another meeting at the premises and gave lengthy advice on how the premises can monitor the level of music and ensure that they will not cause a statutory nuisance. This was followed up in writing. Unfortunately, despite this, complaints continued, and we also received allegations that the premises were failing to comply with their conditions. It should be noted that at this time we understood the difficulties premises had in being restricted to outside trading, and so the main noise we were looking at this point was music. A number of breaches of conditions have been evidenced in the supporting documents provided, mainly covering June and July 2021, which will naturally be the busier times for outside areas. It is important to note that whilst only a number of breaches that we have sufficient evidence of have been noted, there were allegations of many more. A visit was carried out to the premises by colleagues in licensing on the 9th of June 2021. The aim of this visit was to speak to the premises regarding the complaints in terms of the conditions and to stress the need for compliance with them. Unfortunately, just 2 days after this visit, a breach was witnessed by an officer on an out-of-hours visit. On the 23rd of July, I personally was out witnessing a breach of a noise abatement notice. I noted a number of breaches of conditions and specifically a number of people on the terrace area after 10 p.m. with drinks. However, as evidence shows, the premises were still open at 11:30 p.m. on that particular night, with people on the terrace area with drinks. The premises is due to close at 11 p.m. The breaches in the noise abatement notice came despite much advice given to the premises on how they can manage the level of music. We routinely advise that the simplest method is to stand at a boundary to the nearest noise-sensitive property when music is playing. If the music is audible at this point, then it has the potential to be causing a nuisance, and the volume should be adjusted accordingly. People are also advised to be mindful of the bass of the music, which can vary considerably. Once the first breach was witnessed in July, the premises was again written to and advice was given. However, despite this, a second breach was still witnessed. I was advised during PACE interview with Tracy Roberts at the time that the DJ for both events was the former manager that I had spoken to at length only a few months previous. I was advised that the music was mellow, as they did not want people dancing. When I questioned what checks were being carried out by staff to monitor the volume of music, I was advised that this was the responsibility of the door staff. During the interview, we were also presented with a chart to indicate the times that the premises would check the level of music outside. The frustration on our part is that despite the premises being fully aware of the noise complaints and despite a number of meetings and advice given, we saw no indication of any attempt to work with us until we requested they attend for a formal interview. Having witnessed the first breach on the 23rd of July 2021, I saw firsthand the impact that this had on the residents. First, on arriving in the area, the music from the premises was clearly audible. I walked around the complainant's entire property and music and people noise was audible in any room. Far be it from mellow music, the bass was a continuing theme during the entirety of my visit. At times I could clearly make out the lyrics to the songs and customers could be heard singing along. This would mean that it would be impossible for the resident to enjoy any part of her property without hearing the noise from the premises. I noted how, when standing in a complainant's bedroom, the level of noise was sufficient that it would prevent somebody from trying to sleep. We were in receipt of 72 noise complaints relating to the premises in 2020, and in 2021 this number increased to 83. This is despite conditions added via a minor variation and a number of meetings with the premises. A total of over 150 noise complaints for one premises in approximately 18 months cannot be ignored. Complaints of antisocial behaviour and breaches of the conditions are not included in those numbers. This decision to review the premises licence has not been taken lightly and has been after a prolonged period whereby officers have taken a stepped approach to tackling issues. We have engaged with the premises, we have provided full advice to try to assist them. Ultimately, we have lost confidence in the management of the premises and feel the need to request conditions which will further restrict the outside area and provide much needed respite for residents. Our objective is not to place unworkable restrictions preventing a premises from trading. However, a balance needs to be reached that allows the premises to trade and allows residents to enjoy their properties free from any disruption. And that's it.
Thank you very much, Ms Glasgow. I think if we go on to Gary Grant, barrister on behalf of some of the residents, yes? I was going to do it all after everybody else, yes, yes. Yes, all questions from the panel will come to all the representatives after we've done that part of it. So we'll ask you questions in a minute. Right, we'll move on to Gary Grant, barrister on behalf of the some of the representations in support of the review.
Councillors, some pubs are located in places which are unsuited to large, rowdy crowds outside drinking and making a noise that amounts to a public nuisance. And this is one of them. On behalf of the residents who I represent, we do not seek the closure of this pub, and we never have. What we seek is a pub that is operated professionally and well and respects its neighbourhood and the residents around it. That is the help we seek from you and your colleagues today. We are very grateful for the work that Ms Glasscock has put in to this review. And indeed, when you see the efforts that your environmental team have put in, with warning letters, with noise abatement notices, with community protection warnings, each and every one of which has been breached by the current operators of the pub, you may think Ms Glasscock has shown remarkable forbearance in waiting this long to bring the matter before you. And the only areas where we depart from Ms Glasscock is what are the appropriate and proportionate steps to prevent a public nuisance. What I propose to do is to take my submissions comprehensively. So I'm not going to give individual talks on behalf of each of the residents I represent, but I'm going to try and take the highlights from each of their representations and hopefully put it in some form of order. So what I intend to do is firstly to identify where the residents I speak for live. And as will become apparent, I represent 5 residents who live in 4 homes. There's a husband and wife couple, who are the homes that are closest to the pub. I'm going to then make the proposals that we ask you to consider because we believe they are the appropriate remedy. I'm then going to detail the reasons why we say that those proposals, those conditions we ask you to attach are necessary and appropriate and proportionate. And I'm probably going to briefly call Dee Wood, who's this lady, just to give a human sense of what it's like and has been like to live next to this pub in recent years. And I expect that her eloquence will beat anything a lawyer could manage today, because she's lived the experience and I haven't. Before I start, could I please ask for a short video compilation, which has been previously served. And this has been taken by D. Wood, and it's not the worst case scenario reel of what goes on at the pub. It is simply some snapshots, some snippets of what life is like on a daily basis, particularly during the warmer spring and summer months. And if I could perhaps ask for that to be played, I think it will give you a better sense of what the residents have had to suffer. It's 2 minutes long.
You got it down there as well.
No.
Please. Fuck off! You mate, it's all right. Mate, it's on the floor, line, that cunt's building, fuck off! You know what you guys are about. You're dirty, you're dirty.
The dirty cops, leave them alone, yeah. They'll arrest us for fucking nothing.
Are they allowed to drink at the gardeners?
They'll arrest us for nothing.
They've been drinking here as well.
We're not with them. We're not with them now. We're not with them.
Dirty! Naughty!
Oh, hell! What a knobhead!
Now, those videos were taken from the front door of D. Wood's home. Because these are, in the main, they are listed buildings, Grade 2 listed buildings around the pub. As you know, it's part of the York. Thank you. Quite like the special effects. More waves, please, at an appropriate moment. Because this is, as you know, the York Hill Conservation Area. It's a protected area. A lot of the homes are listed. So you cannot, for example, put in full double glazing because you're not allowed to. That sort of noise is the noise which permeates the homes inside of the residents I represent. It's not simply them saying so. You've heard from Miss Glasscock that on a number of occasions, and I'll specify them in a moment, when officers have attended and gone inside the homes of the residents I represent and others, they hear the pub, whether it's music blaring or noise from the crowds outside, they hear it inside the homes of people who live in the immediate vicinity, and it amounts to a public nuisance. Now, of course, Ms. Glasscock and her colleagues in the noise teams can only experience snapshots. They can only attend every so often and hear it for 10, 15 minutes. What they hear that is unreasonable sound is what my clients have to put up with on a near daily basis. There are noise diaries that have been prepared by the residents I speak for, and I will point those out. They're all in the pack before you. Between April 2001 and December 2021, 53% of days were ruined or disrupted by noise from the pub, primarily the outside crowds. 53%. I'm not sure how familiar you are with this particular area. I suspect you're very familiar. I had the benefit of a site visit this morning. And it really is like a semi-rural oasis in the middle of the area. And it's the top of a very large hill. It's your conservation area. The roads are so narrow, there's only enough for a single vehicle to go there. It really is a beautiful location, which is precisely why my clients moved in. Patricia Hudson and Chris Turner, who live at 27 Pump Hill, have lived there for 23 years. They are not newcomers. Unfortunately, they're abroad at the time of this hearing, but I know they're endeavouring to watch today's hearing on your webcast from abroad. Dee Wood has lived there since 2013. Lee Saggers has lived there since 2007, and Carrie Ann Connor has lived there since 2013. These are not people who have just moved in a year or two ago and suddenly want to close the pub that they moved in next to, which has been, I regret to say, the smear against them that has been perpetrated by the operators of the pub, online and in person. They moved into a pub that was a quiet, pleasant pub that suited its location. It is the pub that has radically changed its business model. It's not the residents I represent changing their minds about living next to a pub. Now, in order to show that, could I please refer you to some photographs that are within the pack already. And I think perhaps the most helpful photographs you'll find at page 251 of the agenda pack. And you'll begin to see what has changed through the years. 251, if I could just hold this up, you'll see here, this walled area to the right of the photo, that's what I'm going to call the Horseshoe Terrace. Now that's been there, I understand, for about 60 years, or thereabouts. It was built, we think, when the original cottages that were there were knocked down. So here is the Horseshoe Terrace. So that's 252. And as you see, this was taken, I guess, probably around 2013, 2014, you'll see that the front of the pub was the car park here. And then as you look at the photos as it goes through the year, this time you can see the horseshoe area on the next photo. You can see the cars parked. External drinking was traditionally limited to a few tables within this terrace. You used to have about, I understand, somewhere between 20 or 30 people who were seated, who had a meal or a pint of beer, quiet, reserved, and then left, and caused no nuisance. That is the pub all of the residents I represent moved in next to. And did so happily and didn't complain. What then happened was a creep of tables and chairs to intensify the use of the outside area in particular, but also the inside areas I'll come to. So if you look at page 255, you begin to see a few tables and chairs being put where the cars were parked. And then when you follow those photos through the years, as we approach last couple of years, you see the tables now fill the whole of the front and what was the parking area in before. And then the result of that big intensification of the outside external area, was that it drew crowds of people, but not the previous clientele. So whereas, for example, all my residents, if I may refer to them, they used to be regulars at the Gardener's Arms, but the crowd began to change. And while I have no doubt that there are still a number of locals who do visit the pub still, there appeared to be a deliberate business decision to start appealing to the slightly younger crowd who weren't the locals. They started putting on DJs and indeed applied for planning permission to have a permanent raised DJ booth within the pub. So there was a clear business intention to try and attract a younger crowd who could fill the inside and outside. Now, the inside area only has a capacity of 60 people. And within your papers is an email from the fire safety officer. So this was always a small pub, not a pub that could possibly live in harmony with residents, cheek by jowl with them, if you started to have hundreds of people there. It's never a pub, not designed to do that. But that, in effect, is exactly what happened as a result of all these table and chairs being put outside. And so what you get, if you turn to page 151, you get the crowds that have been deliberately attracted to the venue by the tables and chairs, by allowing them to stand up, sit down outside, and we count just under 100 tables and chairs outside, spaces. 96, I think, is the actual count. But when you've got people standing in addition to sitting, you've got well in excess of 100 people standing and sitting outside. And of course, if they're permitted to drink alcohol, they're likely to be making a noise. The distances, if I could just show you the residents I represent at page 204, is a proximity map. So at 204, these are the residents I represent. So so you see the pub and the outside drinking area marked in the middle. Number 107 York Hill, that's where Dee Wood lives. And as I say, I went there today. The distance between the front door and the pub is not dissimilar to the distance from you and your colleagues now to perhaps the wall at the end. You're that close. 27 Pump Hill is where both Patricia Hudson and Chris Turner, husband and wife, live. Lee Saggers lives at number 22 Pump Hill, and Carrie-Anne Connor lives at 24 Pump Hill. So that's why I say they're the nearest residents, so it's unsurprising that they have to bear the full impact of the activities at the pub. I have no doubt that the pub is popular among its customers who go and is popular among people who live further away, because having a pub is a great amenity to you if you don't have to suffer the noise because you live on its doorstep. The Licensing Act there is, the Licensing Act and indeed reviews are there to protect the wider community. And the wider community amounts to my clients who feel the most immediate impact. We would suggest that your approach to this review follows this type of path. Having heard everything, to ask yourselves, do we trust these operators to operate the pub in the future responsibly and in strict accordance with any conditions you impose today? Do we trust them? If your answer is no, well, then they can't hold a license, and you'll revoke it, and then another operator will be brought in by the responsible landlords to take it over. And they'll apply for a new licence, and indeed it will be welcomed to get it up and going. So we suggest that's your first question. Having heard everything, all the breaches, all the incidents, do we trust these operators to abide by any conditions? If you come to the conclusion we're willing to give them a chance, then I suggest you look at the conditions that are necessary, bearing in mind a history of breaching conditions on their existing licence. I think perhaps the biggest gap between Miss Glasscock, and we agree with almost everything she said, and the residents I represent is this: that the suggestion to control people outside is to effectively cut the closing time of the outdoor area from 10 p.m. down to 9 p.m. Plus to ask people who are screaming to quieten down. Now, I deal with the latter suggestion. That, of course, is always welcome. But the fact is, if someone screamed, they've already disturbed the residents inside. If they're drunk, as many have been, as the evidence suggests, then they're not going to listen to a polite, please be quiet, there are residents. In the submission of the residents, it is not fair for them to have to suffer the continued and immense public nuisance they are suffering up until 9 p.m. And so the restrictions on the outside use should not be limited to only from 9 p.m. Weekends, my clients cannot sit in their garden because of the racket. And at weekends in particular, from about lunchtime, the outside area starts to fill, and that continues until closing and after closing time. They shouldn't have to suffer during the day. They didn't move to the semi-rural location they're in. Frankly, they didn't move into the middle of Soho. They moved here for a reason, so they could have some peace and quiet. That's a reasonable expectation in this area, and that should not have to start from 9 p.m. So the conditions that we are proposing, they're set out in D. Wood's representation, and you will find them, if I could please ask you to turn to page 141. So at 141, at paragraph 46, you'll see a number of conditions that if you're minded not to revoke the license, in other words, if you're prepared to give them a chance to, perhaps for the first time in years, actually strictly abide by the license conditions this authority imposed on them. A, customers are not permitted to take drinks outside the pub or to consume alcohol in any external area. That would be the condition we prefer. We wait to hear any sensible suggestions made on behalf of the pub as to whether there is any flexibility on that sort. I bear in mind, for example, the long-term previous use of just the horseshoe area for about 20 to 30 people seated at tables. But our concern at making that sort of concession, in other words, people can only use the horseshoe area, which is traditionally what happened, but limited to 20 to 30 people seated at tables, our concern is whether the operators will abide by that condition, bearing in mind they breached other conditions imposed, for example, the 10 p.m. curfew. And that's why we hesitate to make that concession, but we're prepared to listen to what's being suggested by the pub, and we can address you, I think, in closing submissions at the end as to what we would ask you to consider. The second condition is that no music shall be played in any external area. The reason for that is obvious. There's a noise abatement notice has been issued precisely because of that. And I doubt that that will be in dispute, although I wait to hear from the pub's representatives. What I have added to Miss Glasscock's suggestion is, and I apologise for it, but a legal technicality, and it's the words in parenthesis in that condition, that under section 177A of the Act, this condition shall apply during the deregulated hours for regulated entertainment. The very dull technical reasons for that is this. Prior to 11 p.m, no condition you impose bites on music because of deregulation provisions. There is an exception to that, and that's if you, at a review hearing, like today, specifically state that we are withdrawing the exception because of the noise and issues of music outside, and you do so under section 177A, and I know you'll be properly advised by your experienced legal advisor on that. C deals with a noise limiter. And, you'll know what that is. That's when all amplified music is essentially routed through a machine that caps the decibel levels, the volume, and that's set at a level determined by your environmental health team that obviously will be set at a level that doesn't cause disturbance in the nearest residential homes. And there are various details as to that noise limiter condition, which are fairly standard, which has been set out in that condition. Over the page at D, a general condition that no noise generated on the premises or by associated plant or equipment shall emanate from the premises, nor vibration be transmitted through the structure of the premises which gives rise to a nuisance. In other words, any steps that need to be taken by the operator to prevent a nuisance must be taken. E, loudspeakers shall not be located in the entrance and exit of the premises or outside the building. F is a proper comprehensive CCTV condition, and one of the purposes of that is so that your officers can inspect CCTV from the pub in case of future allegations of breaches. G ensures that there is someone at the pub who can work the CCTV system. H deals with smokers, and what we suggest is there should be a maximum of 6 smokers outside, and they should be in a agreed designated smoking location. We would suggest the Horseshoe Terrace area, and those smokers who tend to make a lot of noise, because they often have a drink in hand as well, that they are supervised in some way by staff or security people. I would suggest, in addition to that, 2 further conditions based on other representations of those I represent. And the first would be this, that there shall be no outdoor cooking or barbecues. And the reason for that is explained in Carrie Ann Connor's and Lee Sager's representations. Also, Dee Wood mentions it. There were times last summer where sort of an outdoor barbecue was set up, and at times a burger van was allowed onto the forecourt, and the fumes it gave off permeated the homes of my client to the point where one of the residents actually had to receive medical attention because it triggered an asthma attack because the fumes filled up her house. So we would suggest no outdoor cooking or barbecues. Final condition, additional condition, no disc jockeys. This is not a party venue. The pub is trying to turn itself into a party venue. It's advertising DJs, it's using social media to attract the younger crowd, and it's advertising it. And indeed, Laura Walker, I believe, was the events manager trying to organise these events. So we would ask there should be no DJs. This is not the sort of pub in the location where you should have music blaring out, played by DJs, to create a party environment. It's not this sort of location. So those are the proposals that we ask you to consider if you're prepared to give the operators a chance to prove that, contrary to history, they will abide by the conditions you impose. Now, why do we say that that's appropriate? And much has already been said, and I'll try not to repeat it. When I say, and I think there's an attempt to dispute the characteristics of this neighbourhood. When one of the residents I represent suggests, Lee Saggers does it in her representation, that when she moved into the house in some 15 years ago, that this was a most charming, quintessential pub. It did describe itself as a traditional Old English pub. The area itself has been assessed by this council in its role as a planning authority. And if I could take you, please, to the designation of this area as a conservation area. At page 188. So at 188, we're looking at the character appraisal and management plan of Epping Forest District Council in relation to York Hill as a conservation area. And then on the text page at 189, right in the middle, do you see the bullet points, factors contributing to the character of the conservation area? The first one, peace and tranquility in narrow lanes. That is the area we're talking about. What is the result of the intensification, both of the things like DJs and trying to turn it into a party venue, and in particular, which is the greater concern to my clients, this intensification of the outside use? Well, it's set out in great length in the representations of the residents I represent, and I'm not going to repeat everything, but you would have seen, certainly attached to Dee Wood and Patricia Hudson's representations, detailed noise diaries that show just the frequency and type of disturbance they suffered. And those were only kept from about April 2021. And you will also note the times in those noise diaries, because it's by no means that the noise complaints come only after 10 p.m. or only after 9 p.m. They come throughout the day on a whole number of occasions. So may I ask you perhaps when you retire, if you haven't already, to just to flick through the sort of times and frequencies of disturbances within those noise diaries kept by two of the households who I represent today. But to put in bullet point form, what is the result? What is the real human impact on my clients of the way this pub has been operated, particularly over the last few years when it's got so much worse? Extended periods of public nuisance, crowds outside chanting, yelling and swearing, music blaring, particularly on the DJ nights, noise from traffic, doors slamming outside, speeding cars, motorbikes revving up, honking from the cars, public safety concerns because people have to walk in the middle of the road, fights, antisocial behaviour, customers of the pub drunkenly staggering out at the end of the evening and urinating deliberately in my client's front garden and over their gate. On one occasion, one of the drunken customers was urinating over the gate and fell through it and broke it. Vomiting in front gardens of my clients that they have to clear up the next day. Nitrous oxide canisters, laughing gas that's in these silver canisters that youngsters will take to get high. It's now an illegal drug. Those are left strewn over the street, and they're from the customers of the pub. My clients have witnessed drug taking by customers outside. There have been allegations that there's drug dealing inside the pub, which would be consistent with the sort of behaviour you saw on that video, the loud, boisterous young men challenging police cursing the police. It's the sort of behaviour you would expect to see from people who are both in drink as well as under the influence of strong illegal stimulants. The barbecue and burger van smells that I've mentioned. What else has happened that's caused great distress to my clients is this, that if neighbours seek to challenge the customers who are shouting outside their doors and ask them to be quiet, they are repeatedly verbally slapped down by those customers. They are told, and I apologise for my language, they're told to fuck off and not live near the pub, that they can do what they want. That's what they get. And so perhaps understandably, certainly the three ladies I represent here today are single ladies who live on their own. They no longer have the confidence to go and challenge those customers because they know the abuse they're going to get. Perhaps more troublingly, that on a number of occasions when one or more of the residents I represent have attempted to speak civilly with the management, by whom I mean Tracy Roberts, because this is a family-run pub, they do not get an understanding professional response. They tend to be met by abuse, in particular from the son of Tracy Roberts. On one occasion, when complaints were made to the council by two of my clients, the son of Miss Roberts, Tracy Roberts, turned up at the front door, intimidating them and aggressive, and it led to a police complaint for harassment and an offence under the Public Order Act. So my clients only have you to appeal to. They cannot civilly deal anymore with the pub's management. They cannot deal with the individuals. They see you as their protectors today against future disturbance of what they've had to suffer for too many years now. The impact of the noise, as best they can, either they have to close their windows, which doesn't prevent the noise coming in because of the way these old buildings are built. Sound permeates throughout into bedrooms. But if they try and mitigate some of the sound by closing their windows, it simply means they get no ventilation in their houses during the warmer months. One of my residents has had to taken to turning the TV up to top volume just to try and mask the noise outside. They cannot use their gardens and their outdoor space. They've had to cancel dinner parties with friends and family because the noise outside simply wouldn't permit any sort of peaceful dinner party conversation. When friends do visit, they express their shock that anyone could live next to this pub run as it has recently been run. They have been unable to sleep at night. This has caused real anxiety and real distress. My clients are not delicate wallflowers. They are strong women and men, and they have been driven to despair by the antics of this pub in recent years, to the point where they have had to seek, at least two, I won't name them, have had to seek medical help for the anxiety and the stress and are treated. And it's as a direct result of the way the pub is operated. That's not fair. They should not have to live up with that. As I say, the pub has run a campaign since this review was launched to try and paint my clients as the unreasonable ones who move in next to a pub and just want to close the pub. That's how they got so much support. The petition itself suggests there's been an effort to close the pub. That's not what we're trying to do. It's not what Miss Glasscock's trying to do. But that's no doubt why it energised a certain fan base of the pub. But as I hope you can see, we're taking a more proportionate approach to what we're actually suggesting. The suggestions that we've made, I anticipate, will receive broad approach, not just from my clients, but from the more representative bodies who will be speaking to you today or have made representations, whether it's Loughton's Resident Association, you'll find their representation at page 105, whether it's the Town Council at page 111, whether it's the Hills Amenity Society, whose representative will speak to you today, or indeed Councillor Chris Pond. So the sort of suggestions we're making, in particular, no external drinking, receives broad support from those who aren't partisan antagonists in all of this, but those who seek to represent the wider community, balancing the commercial interests of the pub with those of my client. So why we say that the conditions need to be very clear as no external drinking? Well, it's because the way the pub's management have behaved to your officers over recent years. And Ms. Glasscock has touched upon them, but if I could just highlight those again. August 2017, noise abatement notice because loud music was being played outside. Now, it's a criminal offence to breach a noise abatement notice. Did it work? No. There were breaches of that abatement notice. Moving forward, 31st of July 2020, noise from customers shouting and screaming from young adults outside the premises, spilling over into road, obstructing the highway. And what I'm reading out now are the observations of your officers, not what my clients are saying, but when your officers attend, they basically see, albeit in a snapshot, exactly what my clients have to experience on an almost daily basis. So after all this noise in July 2020, on the 7th of August 2020, so a week later, your council took a step they don't take lightly. They issued a community protection warning on Tracy Roberts. And you'll find it within your pack at page 32. And it made clear that the conduct of the pub was detrimental, had a detrimental effect on the quality of life of others in the locality due to the large number of people gathering outside. So your council officers have already concluded the detrimental effect that resulted from the pub's activities. And then there was an attempt to draw a line under all of this. Because in September 2020, there was a meeting between your noise officers and the pub's management. And a minor variation was put in to attach conditions. And this was a softly approach. It was that the outside areas were limited to 10 p.m. And that's why you now see the 10 p.m. condition on the licence. And that was finally put on the licence in October 2020. Now, you would think, would you not, that any responsible operators, having been given a noise abatement notice, having received a community protection warning, having been asked and agreed to add conditions to stop outside use after 10 p.m., you would have thought that they would abide by that, knowing that they were drinking in the last saloon here. But they didn't. They breached even the new conditions put on their license again and again and again. So, after the minor variation, the change of the license to restrict outside use to 10 p.m., what happened? Did that solve the problems? And you'll bear this in mind when you assess whether you have any confidence in these operators going forward. No, because after these conditions got put on in an attempt to resolve matters, there were then 81 noise complaints between January and December 2021. 81 noise complaints, even after the conditions were put on the licence restricting outside use to 10 p.m. There were reports, because my clients saw them, and indeed there are pictures within your photos within your bundle, of repeated breaches of the 10 p.m. curfew outside, with people outside much later. So on the 21st of April 2021, your council officers had to write a warning letter about loud amplified music being played, which was a breach of the noise abatement notice. And you'll find that, you don't need to turn it up, but it's at page 35 of your agenda papers. A couple of months later, 5th of June, your officers witnessed a breach of the 10 p.m. curfew outside. So, for example, if you look at page 50, you'll see a photograph. And that is the 5th of June 10 minutes after 10 p.m. People are still happily drinking inside and there's no efforts to move them, after a condition is on their licence where they promised to get everyone out by 10 p.m. 4 days after that, so on the 9th of June 2021, two of your council officers, Miss Ibrahim and Miss Bastick, met with Tracy Roberts and Laura Walker, who's the new DPS, but has been a manager at the pub for some time. She was there, for example, in June 2021 when the officers visited. So she has, as manager, frankly, overseen much of the problems that are set out in the noise diaries. So I'll deal with Miss Walker's position. We say it makes no difference whose name is formally put on the licence as the DPS. Tracy Roberts, together with her mother, so the licence holder is Patricia Roberts. It seems the pub is actually run by Tracy Roberts, her daughter, and she still runs the show, even today. Whether she's named as the DPS or not, she runs the show today. So we see no difference whether you change, frankly, the name of the person as the DPS. It is the same management team, whatever titles they may call themselves. So we have a meeting, 9th of June, with the council officers, Tracy Roberts and Laura Walker. And this is dealt with in Miss Ibrahim's witness statement. Just for your note, it's page 55. And they speak about allegations from an ex-employee. Ex-employee was suggesting there was drug taking in the toilets that was being overlooked, I'll put it charitably, by the management team. And they were reminded then about the need to bring people in by 10 p.m. What happened? Well, the officers followed up about 6 weeks later on the 23rd of July, 2021. And the officers witnessed, and this is dealt with in Miss Glasscock's statement, it's at page 39 of the agenda papers. Miss Glasscock witnessed breach of the noise abatement notice, loud music, crowds clapping and chanting outside. Miss Glasscock went into one of the residential homes and could hear the racket inside the home. And she also witnessed, yet again, astonishingly, breaches of the 10 p.m. curfew after the warning letter, after the conversation and the meeting. And you'll see those breaches, for example, at page 53, where photographs were taken showing people still using and drinking the external areas well after 10 p.m. These photos are taken at 10:36, right up to, and again at 11:31 at night. And I should add, that meant they were still operating, not simply beyond the 10 p.m. curfew for external customers, but beyond the terms of the closing time of the licence, which is 11 p.m. on a Friday night anyway. So, you then might think, finally, is the pub going to get its house in order? Well, no, it's not. Because on the 27th of August 2021, your noise officers, this was Louise Coveney, one of your officers at page 43, states that she saw a further breach of the noise abatement notice, this time between 10:10 p.m. and 11:38 p.m. Music and people, again, could be heard inside residents' bedrooms, and this actually was a visit to Dee Wood's house opposite. Once again, breach of the 10 p.m. curfew with drinkers outside. And the noise was described by your noise officer from inside the home of a resident. I quote, "It was noise which would prevent the enjoyment of the home and prevent the occupants from sleeping." And that was followed up a few days later with a warning letter on the 2nd of September 2021, and you'll find that at page 46. And the same warning letter invited Tracy Roberts to an interview under caution with your council, because all of these breaches are criminal offences of the conditions, and Tracy Roberts admitted them all. You would have thought even then, wouldn't you, that they'd get their house in order? But they didn't. And if you simply turn to the noise diaries of my clients, you'll see that the nuisance just continued right through to the end of the year when the noise diaries ended. So that is why we say that any promises to reform that you may hear on behalf of the pub, you should take with a pinch of salt, because every promise to reform so far has proven itself to be hollow. They will tell you what they think you want to hear, and experience shows that they have little, if any, intention on carrying it out. They will try and see what they can get away with until they're caught next time. And that's why we suggest that any action or any conditions needs to be clear and robust and leave no room for discretion or ambiguity, because we don't believe that management are responsible enough or able enough to exercise that discretion in a way that doesn't disturb residents. That is why we ask you to take this decision in the interests of the residents who live closest to the pub. To ask yourselves, bearing in mind everything you hear, one, do we trust these operators, who are the same operators, whoever might have their name as the DPS, do we trust them to abide by any of the conditions you impose? If your answer is no, well, there's no point imposing conditions. You can revoke the license, and a new operator will be found by the experienced landlords, and the pub can continue with a new license with a new responsible operator, and we would welcome that. If you're prepared to give them a chance, despite historical suggestions that they may not grab the chance you give them, then we ask for the conditions we've suggested and the ones I outlined, set out in D. Wood's statement, plus the additions, no external drinking, and all the others, because that is a very clear line. No outdoor drinking, there can be no ambiguity. No one has to be got in if there's no drinking at any time, plus the other conditions I've dealt with. So those are the proposals we make for you to consider, which we suggest are appropriate and proportionate. And both me and indeed residents I represent are here to help you with any questions. And those are my submissions. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much, Mr. Grant. Now, I think you mentioned that D. Wood would like to say a few words.
Yes. Dee, can you just
turn your microphone off, Mr. Grant?
Dee, I'm just going to ask you to...
Sorry, Chair. My client's just gone to the toilet.
I'll wait for her.
Would you mind?
Yes. Well, I'll just go through who's going to speak next. I think Councillor Chris Bond, you want to speak in a moment.
Chairman, I just value a couple of words.
Okay. Who else would like to speak?
Chair, I have a statement to read from the Ills Amenity Society.
Right. So when you do speak, if you just give your name for our records. So we'll start off with D. Wood in a moment, and then Councillor Chris Bond, and then the other three who indicate want to speak. And then we'll go from there. So what we do is just procedures. Once I've done all the representations, we ask some questions, the three of us ask some questions on what's been going on and what the representations are. It'll be your chance to just ask questions to them, not give you a representation, just ask questions on what they've said so far. After that, it'll be your chance to put your case forward, all of you and anybody who wants to speak on your behalf. And then we will ask you questions. The residents will ask you questions, or Mr. Grant, who is representing them, ask you questions, after which there'll be a closing speech from both sides without introducing anything new. And then after that, we will retire and make a decision. We intend to stop at around about 12:30 for for a lunch break. I'll presume an hour will we have, Adrian?
An hour's break.
12:30ish?
Half 12 to, I was thinking, 45 minutes or so.
45.
Okay, so we'll stop from, you can go up to town and have a coffee or something. Okay, I think we're all gentlemen left there, but I don't think.
Pop your microphone on.
Yes, just before Dee Wood says, I should have mentioned this. I don't think there's any great dispute as Mr. Craig, the barrister on behalf of his client, was referring to Tracy Roberts, so she's still running the show. But I also meant to refer you to the conclusion of your officer after the PACE. Good. The PACE interview, September 2021. After the PACE interview, your own officers reached a conclusion. And can I ask you to turn to page 54 of the agenda papers? 54. So this is the notes of your officer after the PACE interview with Tracy Roberts in September 2021, and it's the final paragraph. Tracy accepted an interview the premises had failed to comply with the licence conditions. Prior to the minor variation application, we were prepared to agree conditions and work with the premises. However, the premises have shown little regard for them. We see no reason to believe there will be any improvement moving forward, and this premises will continue to generate an unacceptable level of complaints. That's our fear too, and that's why we ask you to take robust but fair steps. And I'm going to ask Dee Wood just to give a sense of, from a human angle, what it's like to have had to live next to the pub since the Troubles.
Thanks, Gary. For quite a few years now, my home life's been really severely disrupted by the activities at the pub, and the mismanagement, actually, by the people that run it. And since I moved in, the pub's transformed really from a really nice, quiet, village-style pub with, drinking predominantly inside into a noisy, rowdy, heavy drinking place with lots of horrible antisocial behaviour and public nuisance. And it's just become a horrible place now to live. And I want to be clear about something. I'm not a resident who's moved in close to a pub that's been there for years and then we now want to see it shut down or anything like that. I don't want to see the pub closed. I'm just asking for your help and for my neighbours as well, so that we can get our peaceful lives back. That's all we want. We're exasperated by the noise and the antisocial behaviour from the pub, which includes, unacceptable levels of noise from people and music, patrons of the pub urinating in hedges and over our gates and breaking gates, intimidation and harassment of residents, putting us in fear for our own safety, fighting, unacceptable levels of swearing, and as you've seen from one of the videos, contempt for even the police when they're called out to incidents. So really, I'm just going to ask you to try and imagine a little bit, if you can, about what it's like living where we live. Because in the last few years, as you'll have heard, there's been more and more tables that's been put onto the area at the front of the pub, which was a parking area for as long as people can remember. And I'm going to ask you to imagine what it's now like. I'm going to ask you to imagine that you live where we live, and that the parking area is literally, as Gary said, just a few metres from your house. Now imagine that that space over there is filled with 100-odd people who are now talking, screaming, yelling and swearing for anything up to 12 hours a day. Now imagine that your home's a really old house and you don't have any soundproofing. So even when you go inside, you don't get any respite because you can still hear everything that's going on. Then imagine that it's summer and it's really nice and warm outside, but you can't open your doors or your windows. And if you do, you're met with a barrage of swearing and yelling behaviour. And if you've got a garden, which we have, and it's a lovely place to live, you can't even sit in your own garden. You can't even do that. That's not an acceptable way to ask us to live. And when we've complained about it, we've been verbally abused and intimidated, online and in person. We've kept diary sheets, we've taken photos and videos, and you've seen some of the evidence from the council's team. This isn't neighbours complaining about a bit of noise once in a while. This is serious. This is continual antisocial behaviour that the pub is either encouraging or, frankly, is incapable of managing. So we're asking for you to please put a stop to it. And the main condition we're asking for is for you to stop the outside drinking, because it will stop the outside fighting, the outside yelling, and the outside screaming. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms Wood. We now go to Chris Pond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm a long-time user of the Gardens Arms occasionally. I live about a quarter of a mile from it. I first, I think, entered the Gardeners Arms in 1967, just after the demolition of number 99 York Hill, which gave rise to what you've called the horseshoe. Before that, there was just, I think, a bench outside the front of the pub, one single bench. I've been the member for St John's Ward on Loughton Town Council for 26 years, and I've been the county councillor for Loughton Central, which includes St John's Ward and the pub, for 17 years. I have no animus at all against the existence of the pub. Up to about 2015, 2016, had the pub asked me to defend it as an asset of community value, I would have gladly done so, because it was a quiet local, very much suited to its semi-rural location, and cognizant of the fact that there are residential houses right almost up to its doorstep. My view is that till 5 or 6 years ago, nobody would have minded the pub and how it was run. But from then, it has changed radically. And I think people would now characterise it as a raucous and rowdy place, particularly on summer evenings, because of exterior drinking. The first I knew of it was that in my submission, which you will find in your packs, I noted that part of the highway appears to have been taken over for drinking, outside drinking, tables and chairs. And the agent for the pub has subsequently informed me that none of the highway has been taken for drinking, but just the forecourt of the pub. The forecourt was part of the highway and is stated so on the definitive highways map published by the County Council. It was used largely for stationing of vehicles, but it was also a footway, because there is no footway at the place where the pub have subsequently erected a picket fence, and people must therefore walk in the road, in the open carriageway, to get to wherever they're going. I do note, I do not know any of the people round about as a personal friend. I have no interest to declare, but starting, I think, in 2016 or 2017, my phone has been ringing fairly constantly during the summer months with my constituents complaining about the issues which have emanated from the pub, which you've heard from D. Woods' testimony and from that of the barrister in the last 20 minutes. And I would have regarded the Gardener's Arms now as a difficult area and one which causes me as county councillor quite a lot of trouble. I have not spoken to the to the management of the pub, but the conversion of the forecourt, which was partly highway, as you will see from the map in my submission, for expansion of outdoor drinking, and therefore all for private profit, has, I think, been to the detriment of my constituents in the immediate area of the licensed premises. I would add, I think, to what has been said, that one question which appears in my mind is the new DPS, who was part of the management team of the current management, is that DPS sufficiently distanced from the previous management and the conduct of the premises as to assure any public confidence? And that is a question I would put in the minds of you, Councillor Morgan, and your colleagues. I would have thought any conditions that were to be altered ought also to provide for a gap of at least 3 feet where the picket fence is now towards the pub, to be allowed for use as public highway without the encroachment of tables and chairs. And the whole of the outside seating would have to be reduced, and it would be for you, Chairman, and your colleagues to say how many places should be provided outside. I do not want to see the pub closed down. I think it's an asset to the area, potentially an asset to the area, but under the current circumstances, it is not a premises which is conducive to the good of the area. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Now, the lady at the back, if you just give us your name and...
I will indeed. My name is Judith Walker. I'm a member of the Loughton Residents Association Plans Group, and my role is to make representations on behalf of the group and appear at licence hearings. I've visited some of the properties affected by the pub, and I have reviewed the evidence submitted, both that of the local residents and the council officers. Looking at the evidence provided, what is clear is that in the last few years, the pub has been causing deep distress to local residents, and notwithstanding numerous visits by council officers and warnings, the problem has persisted and has indeed grown worse. The pub has existed for a very long time without causing significant problems for local residents. However, something has changed in order for there to be 153 complaints of noise and breaches of licensing conditions between July 2020 and December 2021. In my opinion, there are 2 driving factors behind the problem. Firstly, the increase in the number of tables and chairs has led to a substantial increase in the number of patrons using the pubs where there is no soundproofing because they're obviously outdoors. The pub has survived for a very long time with no tables and chairs outside the front entrance, just having the horseshoe terrace seating. I consider the table and chairs is the main root of the problem. The large numbers of people sitting and standing on the pub forecourt has intensified the use and made life intolerable for residents. The occupation of the front area brings customers closer to the residents opposite, and their voices can be heard clearly from within. That is why, in my opinion, the only solution is to return to the previous condition, which is to have no tables and chairs outside the front of the pub. Until the pub can return to a harmonious working relationship with its neighbours, I doubt that even having just the horseshoe terrace occupied for drinking will be acceptable. In my opinion, a reduced restriction to 9 p.m. does nothing to overcome the problems that are arising all day when people use the outdoor seating. The applicant claims that reducing the seating or the hours of operation may make it a non-viable business. We haven't seen any viability evidence, and none has been provided by the owners or verified by an independent expert as to whether that would be actually the case. The second issue is the noise generated from both inside and outside of the pub. The installation of a DJ booth and admission by a bar manager that speakers are put outside the pub shows the direction of travel for this pub. I have witnessed hearing people's voices from inside neighbours' properties, let alone music, whether that is amplified music or not. In my opinion, any form of outside music is unacceptable in what would otherwise be a quiet residential area. I note that there is now a new named DPS, but I also note that this person has been working at the pub for at least the last 12 months and was the events and project manager, which in itself shows the ambition of the pub to be a more entertainment type of facility. I personally don't think swapping the DPS role to another member of staff in the pub will make any difference whatsoever. The pub's petition claims that this is a smear campaign by a select few residents, and it has been operated well within the scope of our licence. In my opinion, this is very misleading for those who have signed up to it. The evidence is overwhelming that it has not operated well within the scope of their licence. Residents don't make over 150 complaints to the council if this is only a minor issue, nor do they employ barristers to get across their case. Officers have visited the pub and witnessed the breaches in the licence and the noise abatement order. Overall, I feel that the officer's report does not do enough to protect residents whose lives have been blighted long enough. I therefore request members to impose the conditions to limit the pub to indoor drinking only, to have no music played outside, to consider the possibility of a 25-year-old only policy, strict closing with the patrons leaving the premises by 10 p.m, and the Horseshoe Terrace to be designated a smoking terrace, which would discourage patrons from wandering past people's homes to smoke. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know a gentleman on the end, I think, if you give your name and...
My name's Glenn Martin. I've been asked to read a statement for the Hills Amenity Society, which represents Wallers Oppet, some residents in Pump Hill and York Hill. May I continue? Yeah. So I'm the owner and occupier of 97 York Hill. My property immediately abuts the southern boundary of the Gardeners Arms, where I've lived since 1998. I'm speaking this morning on behalf of myself and other neighbours in York Hill, Pump Hill, Queens Road, Wallers Oppet, Woodbury Hill, while supporting this premises licence review. The Garden Arms is located in the Art of York Hill Conservation Area at the top of York Hill and on the edge of Epping Forest. The locality is entirely residential except for the pub. York Hill, Pump Hill, Woodbury Hill are narrow single-track lanes largely without pavements. When the pub is not operating, the area is very quiet with very limited traffic movements, no through traffic. With limited off-street parking, roadways are extensively used for parking by local residents where the pre-existing parking deficits encumbered by the pub patrons. Nor can these roadways easily accommodate large delivery lorries which struggle to reverse into the pub car park, often causing damage to the bollards protecting the green opposite. Many of the pub's neighbouring properties are listed, and some, like others, adjoining the pub of timber construction with single glazing. They are densely packed around the Gardeners Arms, rendering residents very vulnerable to noise nuisance. Until 2013, the amount of the external seating was limited to a small area to the right-hand side of the front of the pub, where the seating provided accommodation of approximately 20 to 30 patrons. The remaining front area was used for customers parking in 2013. The pub changed the use of land without getting planning change of use for outside seating, progressively increasing the capacity of some up to 90 patrons. This intensification of outside use, together with poor management of the establishment, all day opening 11 to 11 has caused misery to residents at the top of York Hill and Pump Hill and Wallersoppers by virtue of unacceptable levels of people and music noise, unacceptable levels of swearing and intoxication, hot food preparation, cooking smells nuisance, pubs patrons urinating in edges and vomiting, slamming of car doors, double parking, traffic problems giving rise to public safety concern, and intimidation of some residents. The overall intensification of use of poor management of the pub, the numerous examples of failure to follow simple plan and licence regulations has resulted in public nuisance and led to increased crime in the locality, with drug dealing, drunken fights, intimidation behaviour to local residents, details of noise nuisance and other problems experienced been made known to you by my fellow residents in their representations. The licensee has made no attempt to engage with neighbouring residents, rather there have been blatant disregard for residents' amenity. A late approach was made to the Hill Society on the 8th of April by Mr Andrew Newman to meet before this hearing, but given short notice in the Easter holiday, it was not possible to convene a meeting. We asked the Licence Review Committee conditions: outside drinking disallowed anywhere at any time, no deliveries should be made before 10 a.m. or none at all weekends, no hot food should be prepared outside, no music should be played outside, strict limits be imposed on the use of function room to ensure residential amenity, quiet employment surrounding residential property that can be enjoyed particularly at weekends. The location is simply unable to support and sustain intensification of use without causing total unacceptation of the immediate local residents. Having read that statement, I will say I've lived there a long, long time and have had a great relationship personally with Tracy and Pat over the years. Until one issue of noise and music on the 17th of April 2021, where the back garden was used as an opening party. And the state of noise, which I had spoken to Tracy on and said I wouldn't accept this type of noise. I don't know if you got that little bit, but that was the music right across the gardens. At the back, we couldn't use our gardens that day. I mean, I don't want to keep playing it. But I had spoken to Tracy after that. It was reported, and now I can't stop it. I apologise. To Glasscop, I had spoken to Tracy, who assured me it wouldn't happen again in the back because it was an opening party. And it hadn't since. So thank you for that.
Okay, thank you. Just turn your microphone off, thank you. Is there anybody else wants to speak on behalf of the residents? If not, I'll ask my colleagues if they have any questions for Ms Glascott or the members of the residents. Councillor Lyne.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I do have a question for Councillor Pond, actually. I've called up his documentation, page 104. I'd like to know more about the boundary of the public highway. I can see some hatched area in front of the pub, so I just wanted some clarification as to exactly what you considered to be the sort of area that is been taken over from the highway.
Yes, Chairman.
Can you put the microphone on, please?
Councillor Williamson kindly lent me the diagram. This is taken from the highways map, the Essex highways map, and I have spoken to the cabinet member at Essex for this. It is an undefined area of public highway, in other words, in which public highway rights subsist. And as you can see, it extends the whole length of the premises and round where there is a curve in the road junction. It is hatched, it is undefined, which means it hadn't at the time of the drawing of the map got a fence around it. But during the lockdown, the pub erected a very neat picket fence around the arc that you can see from the eastern side of the pub to the western side. And the whole of that area behind that picket fence has in my experience, been used for tables and chairs and drinking.
104.
Other questions?
Not at the moment.
No other questions?
Not at the moment. I'll
Okay.
come back.
Councillor Kesker, any questions for Ms.
thank
Prescott
you,
or the other members?
Well, I've only one question to ask, and that is the front area that was a car park. Is that within the licensable area, or is it a car park? Perhaps Ms. Ibrahim could answer that.
On their original plan, they do have the front, a section of the front, and they have outside areas on the side and the back on their original licence plan, yes. If they chose to use it as a car park originally, it's not something that I can comment on, but it is on the plan, on their original plan dating back.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Any other questions at the moment? Right, if you would like to... oh, yeah, please.
Thank you. I'd just like to ask Ms Glasscock question. You said the noise abatement notice was served on the property. It wasn't, was it? It was served on the DPS. It doesn't actually affect the property, it affects the person, doesn't it?
Just put yours off a minute.
Yeah, sorry. The noise abatement notice was served on Tracy Roberts as the designated premises supervisor. Ultimately, the DPS is the person responsible. So when we serve a noise abatement notice, it gets served on that person. Effectively, what that does mean is that in Tracy Roberts no longer being the DPS, at present, there is now no noise abatement notice in force.
And just one other question. It's been raised by the residents that noise limiters should be put into the property. From your experience and monitoring, is the noise coming from inside the property that's causing a nuisance, or is it outside speakers, which is why you put in the request for no outside speakers?
Okay, so it's effectively a range of where the noise is coming from. I can certainly say that when I attended on the 23rd of July and witnessed the brief noise abatement notice, the music was actually happening inside the premises. There was no music outside the premises, but I could clearly hear, bearing in mind inside the premises, and then I was inside a complainant's property, I could clearly hear the music. I could even make out the words of the songs. However, April last year, there was a time when premises were restricted and they could only open outside. And we did have issues, I think a gentleman there that referred to it, where the back area was used for a launch party, shall we say, which, you know, caused considerable noise to residents. Advice was given to the premises that we did not believe that they could comply with a noise abatement notice if they had music in that area. We have carried out other visits and we've witnessed music that has been outside. That is why we've come to the conclusion, really, A, that they can't have music outside. It is impossible to comply with a noise abatement notice, or if one is not enforced, they will very soon end up with a noise abatement notice with music outside. However, when we've witnessed the breaches, it's not been outside, it's been inside the premises.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lyon, you have another question?
Yes, for Ms Glasscock. I've noticed there's lots of letters and various statements being made on behalf of the council. Have you had any response back officially in writing from the DPS or any of the operators?
At the times when I have been writing to the premises, so since we started to notice the increase in noise complaints, I was writing to the premises, I've had meetings. I can't say I've received anything in writing. I can't say I've received phone calls from the premises to try and work with me. We did attend a meeting in September 2020. If I can be quite honest, I found the premises, the representatives at the premises to be quite obstructive into anything I was prepared to say to them, and it did Since I actually submitted the review application, I was suddenly in receipt of a draft dispersal policy, which I'm not doubting, and I read through that and that was okay to me. My issue being that we've had issues for over 18 months. I've written to the premises, there's been meetings. Not one point have I received anything in writing. They haven't contacted me, they haven't wanted to work with me until I advised them that they needed to come in for an interview.
I noticed that there's information up or including December 2021. Do we have any information about breaches or noise in 2022?
At present, we haven't effectively got noise complaints for 2022. I think really the weather has played, shall we say, quite a part in it. And ultimately, recently, I think people have been waiting for the outcome of this review because it was served in February. So I think that's played a part. I do know that there was an incident in February where there was a breach of the licence conditions. Unfortunately, I don't have any evidence to hand of that, but I can say that there was an allegation of a breach of the conditions as recent as February 2022.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Grant.
My clients inform me that, yes, they've made a number of noise complaints in 2022.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Right, we have no further questions. It's up to you to just ask questions at the moment.
Yeah, I have a few. For Miss Glascott. I'll just deal. I'm dealing with the review application. Just ask you to turn to page 13, if I may. You got it. I don't know if somebody's page 13. So you've got a duty to promote the licensing objectives and try and ensure that licensing objectives are promoted, particularly the prevention of public nuisance. That'd be fair to say. And you presumably accept there's got to be a balancing exercise between the legitimate needs of a business and the wider interests of the community and the impact that a licensed premise can have upon them. Is that fair? I'm not trying to trip you up, by the way. You're looking like I'm about to try and trip you up. I'm not, I promise you. Just trying to get the position clear.
I think really I made clear in my opening statement that there does need to be a balance.
You've asked for these conditions to be added to the licence, as well as the removal of the DPS in the review application. That remains your position today?
Yep, the conditions that we have requested to date, that is still the conditions that we require to be added to the licence.
And so presumably, I'm always terrible with these microphones, I don't know why, I should be used to them by now. And so presumably you would consider those appropriate and proportionate steps in the circumstances?
For us as a noise team, we consider those to be acceptable conditions. However, I do accept that residents that are impacted a lot more than us as noise officers, obviously they may feel different about that.
And you must be aware that there are a lot of local residents who live very local to the pub, who've written in support of the pub. You were aware of that?
I am aware that there was a large amount of representations in support of the premises, which, to be honest, I expected, because if people quite happily drink at the premises, are they naturally going to be swayed by something that I put in to review a licence? Probably not.
But do you accept, looking at the addresses on some of those representations, that a lot of them are people who live very close to the pub, as well as these people who are in the room?
I accept that some of them do live close to the premises. However, what I would say is that it doesn't change. You know, somebody may go to the premises, they may live 50 metres away, they may go to the premises. However, if they're at the premises, effectively, they're not being impacted by any noise that is generated in that premises. The people that are being impacted is the people that feel that they can't go to the premises anymore and are being impacted by noise on a daily basis in the summer months.
And just to be clear, you have, well, first of all, just to be clear, the conditions that you suggested were agreed, I think, on the 22nd of March by the premises. You might not remember the exact date, but in the last few weeks.
I did receive an email suggesting that the premises would be in agreement with the conditions that I had put forward, yes.
You've talked about receiving the dispersals policy. Are you content that dispersals policy is then therefore in accordance with the condition that you've suggested in relation to a dispersals policy?
The dispersal policy has been received. We do need to go through that again. Obviously, if it forms part of the conditions, then that will go through again. Obviously, as you can imagine, in receiving it, we've looked at it briefly. It does seem to be adequate. It does seem to answer our interests. However, it would be gone through again prior to us confirming that we're happy with it, but we would confirm with the premises when that has happened.
And just lastly, you've touched upon this, but I think it's important that we perhaps expand upon it a little. Would it be fair to say that you, as a section within Epping Forest District Council, were faced with a large number of issues with external areas, both in the summer of 20 and 2021, not just in terms of these premises, but much more widely? Would that be fair?
Yes, in April 2021, as a noise team, we were inundated with noise complaints because many premises could only open outside. However, do we have evidence that every premises that we received complaints for was causing a nuisance? No, we don't. We do have the evidence that this premises is causing a nuisance.
And just lastly, do you know of any other premises licence in this district that has a restriction preventing people drinking outside?
To hand, I wouldn't be able to say, purely because, if I can be completely honest, as a noise team, we are responsible for a designated area. I cover a different area to Loughton. I don't even cover the area of Loughton. So really, I know the premises that I cover, and obviously I now know the Gardener's Arms. I wouldn't be able to answer that question today, I'm afraid.
Let me would it be fair to say you don't know of any? You're not aware of any?
I know of a lot of premises that have got a large amount of restrictions on them, but can I say that I know of any that have no drinking outside? No, I can't.
Okay. Are there any other questions from anybody before we... No? Okay, I think it's appropriate time to stop for lunch, and we will return at 1:15 to continue. back. I think we've got everybody.
Almost everybody.
Ken's gone home, so that's it. Okay, we'll continue our review. We'll really go on to the actual the licence for the Gardener's Arms. So we'll leave it to you to open the presentation for the Gardener's Arms, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's important for me at the outset just to set out one fundamental aspect of my client's case, because Mr Grant and Ms Walker in particular, and one or two others on the other side of the room have talked about fairly glibly about the discontinuance of the external area. And just to make my client's position clear, I've spoken to my client, if that's okay to call him that, Mr Grant. I've also spoken to the area manager about the viability of the pub. The simple position is this: if you remove that external area from the scope of the licence and prevent people utilising it for consumption of alcohol and frankly sitting out there and eating, then the business isn't viable. That's a view that I echo. Before I came to the bar, I was in the trade for 20 years. I think I speak with some authority on this, and certainly Charlie Carroll, the area manager, who has even more experience, she had about 25 years experience in the trade, completely is in accordance with that. The removal of that external area, it will serve the same purpose as revoking the licence, irrespective of who the operator is. Okay, so we'll perhaps like certain things back from 2013. I'm sure my client would very much like to be paying the same rent and the same business rates and paying the same wages and having the same level of overhead. But the world has changed significantly since 2013. I don't expect anyone in this room would dispute that, in fact. And it's certainly changed to a seismic extent for the licensed trade. And there is nothing wrong with businesses evolving by necessity or by circumstance in order to maintain their viability. Of course, that has to be balanced against their legal responsibilities. It has to be balanced against, through the context of a licensed business, the requirement to promote the licensing objectives. But at the end of the day, any licensed business, if it isn't viable, won't function, won't provide a benefit to the wider community, to the people who use it on a regular basis, and to people who live nearby. Another one thing that I did pick up, and it's quite important that I highlight this, in fact. Mr Grant, in fact, said if my client was going to be compliant with the conditions, it would be for the first time in years. Well, what we're talking about here, in Pat and Tracy in particular, are two individuals, one who has been the licence holder here for 34 years. So I just want everyone to think back what they were doing in 1988. And Tracy's been involved since 1991, so that's 31 years. And in actual fact, prior to the minor variation being submitted 18 months ago, so not several years, 18 months ago, there were no conditions on this licence. None. There would have been mandatory conditions that apply to every premises licence in the country, but no conditions on a licence that was transferred over with the grandfather rights that any former justice's licence benefited from on the 24th of November 2005. No conditions, which means there's been no reviews, no intervention in that licence during that period. And I just would like you as members of this committee to have that very near to the forefront of your mind as you can when determining the suitability of these people to operate this business, the level of responsibility they have, their consideration for the people who live around them, because if they didn't have any of those things, they wouldn't have had the pub for 34 years. In what has been, in many ways, a catastrophic period for the licensed trade, it's astonishing that these people have had this pub for as long, and up until a couple of years ago, when, frankly, I'll turn to that shortly, because I think we have to look at 2020 and 2021 and the summer of those 2 years with particular care, given the unusual circumstances that we found ourselves in. Up to that point, no issues with this pub. And it's absolutely right that you factor that in. This isn't somebody who's rocked up in a Cadillac with a Stetson on, who's taken the pub on 6 months ago and has caused a load of problems. 34 years they've been in this pub, providing a benefit to the local community. And yes, there are a number of representations from the people who sit the other side of the room, but there's more representations from people in support of the pub. And I will take you through a number of those in due course. But it's absolutely right to point out that a number of those representations are from people who live very close to the pub. So this is not a uniform picture. There are people within these representations who say, I live within 50 yards of the pub, I've never had any problems with it. And so you are tasked, of course, with making an evaluation on what is an appropriate and proportionate step for you to take in the circumstances of this review. And I'm sure you will balance out those two opposite perspectives when arriving at what you view to be like I say, a proportionate and appropriate steps following this review hearing. Good friend of mine, 2005, in fact, his wedding was at Glen Eagles. He married a girl from Loughton, and I called her up when I was away, actually on holiday. When I got this instruction, I called her up while I was away and discussed the pub with her. She used to drink in the pub when she lived in Loughton. She had very fond memories of it. She put me in touch with her friend who used to work behind the bar, Ellie, and following which I actually went to the pub last night. And I think this is quite telling, actually, that Ellie's mum and dad were in the pub. I had a good chat with them. I had a good chat with a number of the locals. I really like the pub. Not that that counts for anything, but I think it's got a lot of character. It's got a lot of personality. It's fairly unique. In fact, I would say, as a proposition, it's different from probably any pub I can remember being in its own way. But I was especially struck by the warmth and affection that the people in there had for it. It wasn't just any other local. It was obvious to me that these people, it was very much a core part of their lives. And of course, what we're not going to suggest today, I just want to be clear on this point, we're not going to suggest is that you leave things as they are. Tracy has been interviewed under caution. She's accepted there have been some shortcomings. She acknowledges that. And by virtue of the fact that the premises has agreed to the steps that environmental health have suggested, is a recognition of that. It's a recognition that 2020, 2021 were challenging times for premises that had external areas. Many premises that did not have external areas, of course, weren't able to operate, for example, in April and June of last year, to some extent, April and May, sorry, forgive me, and just by some extension June as well of last year. Many premises didn't open until the July. And so those premises that were in a position to operate during that time, when people had been shut away to all intents and purposes for 5 months, of course there were going to be issues, and I'm grateful that that's been acknowledged all around, not just by environmental health, but also by some of the representations as well. And again, that's something that I think it's right that you take that into account, because whilst there's been some nebulous reference to some complaints, and no means of verifying who they were by and what they were in relation to today, you are effectively have been invited to speculate by Mr Grant in relation to 2022 representations as things stand. And I have to take issue with the fact the weather's been actually quite good in 2022. It was a very fine February, for example, no question. In February the weather was good, early March it was good, wasn't too good in April, but it's been reasonably good, reasonably dry and reasonably sunny this year, and you don't have any evidence that you can rely upon about any meaningful complaints that have been forthcoming to your appropriate responsible authorities during that time. So that's the background of the pub. It's a pub, it's a local pub. I did ask Tracy this morning, the split between wet and dry is about 80 to 20, which is what I would have expected. In fact, that's what I guessed at, and I got it right. So 20% of the turnover is food, which is pretty consistent with a premises like that. It's not completely wet-led. And in actual fact, Tracy herself does work in the kitchen. It's one of the reasons she's been able to take a step back. No suggestion she's not going to be involved in the business going forward. She has the lease in her name. She's my client, as is Pat, and to an extent as Laura as well. So my three clients sit to my right, and Tracy accepts that perhaps she needs to take a step back, and I will turn to Laura and her CV in a bit because I know questions have been raised about her suitability. She has a very impressive CV, in fact, with what I think crucially is an element of corporate background as well, which I think it's right to say in order that whatever steps you determine today are taken, it's right that they're followed in a rigid and systematic and a thorough way. And I have no doubt in my mind that she will manage to do that. So, let's first of all, if I may, invite you to turn to page 60 in the agenda pack. Which is the premises licence. It's certainly a lot more threadbare than one or two that I've been dealing with lately, which I think is a positive sign. There is only one licensable activity, namely the sale of alcohol by retail. And I would say that those hours are almost certainly, I might even ask the question, but I can say with some certainty they will have been the hours that would have transferred over in November 2005. So you have simply here a premises that authorise the sale of alcohol Monday to Saturday from 11 in the morning till 11 at night. Very rare to see those hours these days. And of course, one of the things that has been levied at my clients is that they are desperate to eke every last penny out of this business. Well, if that was the case, would the premises still be authorised to sell alcohol till 11? They'd have tried to push the hours back. That's a recognition of the role of this place as a community pub, and to keep the hours to a level that are in accordance with the hours that pubs used to operate at. And on a Sunday, like I say, it's noon till 23:30. On and off sales, not unusual these days, but and no late night refreshment and no regulated entertainment. Just invite you then, if I may, to turn then just very quickly to page 66. I don't think that's strictly correct. Annex 2 says conditions consistent with the operating schedule. I think those conditions are consistent with the minor variation that was submitted, I think, in the October, bear with me, September of 2020. So they relate to that. But prior to that, no conditions whatsoever on this licence, which, as I've said, is supportive of the responsible way that these premises have been operated for over 30 years prior to, like I say, 2020. One or two issues. I think it's right, actually, at this stage, I address the wider issue. And I don't think this is going to be there'll perhaps be a difference of emphasis here, but I don't think anybody in this room would disagree with the fact the green, which is a patch of land that is situated, if you look out the premises, sort of, it's at 10 o'clock. If you look straight from the exit at the front, that is an area that is not part of the licensable area. That is used by, it's owned by the City of London Corporation. In fact, there were some benches on there that were removed a short while ago. But it's clear that that is a space that has been utilised increasingly in the last couple of years by members of the public who are not associated with the pub in any way, who go up there and drink and smoke weed and litter and I'm sure some of these issues around people who, it's being stated, are urinating in people's gardens. Doubtless, a number of those are people who've attended the Green. And in actual fact, I spoke to Tracy last night when I was at the pub, and she was at great pains to tell me that, first of all, they help clear the litter up there. If there's not a pub here, that's not going to happen. They tell patrons, if patrons happen to wander off onto there, they drag them back and ensure that they don't go onto there. And so, of course, that's not their responsibility. And I'm sure you'll be given legal advice on that. It simply can't be their responsibility. And people are going up there. The views of London are incredible up there. I was blown away. I got there a bit late last night. It was a bit dark, unfortunately. But the views of London are incredible. So it's understandable that people want to go up there. But there will doubtless be a significant element of people who are up there and are nothing whatsoever to do with the pub and haven't been at any point. And so, again, you've been presented today with a huge amount of what I would say is matters that have been presented to you as fact, but actually without anything substantial to back it up. And just add to that I don't doubt for a second, based on what I've seen, that a significant number of issues in that area that have been described on the basis that they are as asserted are as a consequence of people who are on the Green. So what I'll do now, because this, you really, I suppose, based on my submissions around the external area, I guess the options you have available to you. I mean, look, no one's asking you to revoke this licence. Not even Mr. Grant. He's not asked you to revoke it. He's asked you to consider it. Well, of course you've got to consider it. You've got to consider all the options. You know, it would be wrong of any licensing subcommittee not to consider all the options that were available to them in a hearing. That would be failing to fulfil your statutory duty. You've got to consider all the options that are available to you and come to take a proportionate step off the back of that. But nobody here is asking for that. So what you are then faced with is following the suggestions of those who've made representations on the other side of the room, which we say will effectively end in the revocation of the pub. And we're clearly not inviting you to do that. Otherwise, I wouldn't be sat here now. The other option is that you do nothing. Again, we're not inviting you to do that. I suppose a third option is you follow the advice of your experts in the room, and the Section 182 guidance is abundantly clear on this, that 9.12, again, I'm sure you'll be given the appropriate legal advice on that environmental health are experts in their own field. You heard from Ms. Glasscock that she considered at the outset of the review that those conditions were a proportionate and appropriate step. And that remains the case now. And so if you were to go beyond that to the extent certainly Mr. Grant is inviting you to follow, then you would essentially be saying that your own expert is wrong and that it's not proportionate, actually. You need to go further than they think is proportionate, which we would say would be wholly wrong and would finish the business in any event, and not just for my client, but for any other operator coming in going forward. So last night I went to the pub. So first of all, let's just firstly because I think we need to do this in a very systematic way. If I just invite you to turn to page 13. Now, the review application was submitted in late February, and these conditions were agreed on the 22nd of March. So, within just about, because of course February's a shorter month, so yeah, within the 28 days. Not there's any obligation for the licence holder to do that, but within the rep period, these conditions were agreed in full. And I'll deal with each of these. First of all, no music to be played outside. So, and I agree with Mr Grant's analysis on the section 177A point. That condition cannot have any enforceability without the application of that section of the Act to it. So we agree with that, otherwise it's not enforceable. And section 182 guidance at 1.16 is very clear that conditions need to be enforceable. They also need to be proportionate, tailored to the type of premises and crucially capable of being met, I will add. And they shouldn't place a disproportionate burden on the business, but I'll turn to that perhaps in more detail at the end. Outside areas to be cleared of customers by 2100. This is a significant imposition on the business. It might only look like an hour to a casual observer, but actually that's not correct, because lots of people like to have a meal at a premises, and if they know they've got to be out of the external area by 9 o'clock, lots of people will go, we ain't going to go there. It's not worth it. We've got to be out by 9 o'clock. And so what my client has agreed to there is something that will in fact significantly impact on their business in order to endeavour to reach a position that can accommodate their commercial needs, legitimate commercial needs, and the interests of the wider community as part of a balancing exercise. And that's what we're here to do today with respect. Further condition that after 2100 hours, people are only to be outside for smoking. A maximum of 6 people outside smoking at any one time. That's been agreed. A written dispersals policy that shall be in place and implemented at the premises to move customers away from the premises. I never like conditions with the same word in twice, but that's just me. And immediate vicinity in such a way as to cause minimum disturbance or nuisance to the neighbours. And not only has that condition been agreed, but a dispersals policy that Environmental Health have very kindly accepted is adequate from, at least on paper, has been submitted. And so that's, I hesitate to use the expression, that's oven ready, that particular policy and good to go. And of course any conditions you oppose today won't take effect for 21 days in any event. So my client does have a period of time in order to get their ducks in a row. And that dispersal policy is subject to 6 monthly reviews. Lastly, members of staff are actually actively asked to ask customers sat on the terrace who are excessively loud to be mindful of neighbouring residential properties. So that's something that is a positive requirement upon the members of staff. And this is particularly radical, the signage, provision of signage. And then, of course, is the requirement that they placed upon it is removal of Tracy as DPS. And I'll turn, as I say, in due course to Laura and her suitability. So, those are already agreed. You've got the experts sat on the other side of the room that you are required by Section 182 guidance to give significant weight to their considered position. You've heard from Ms Glasscock about her the way she balanced out. It was a balancing exercise for her, and that she took into account a number of factors, including the need to consider the neighbours. She was obviously very mindful of that, and so that's the default position. But I went to the pub last night and I said to my client, okay, let's go through. So now I'm going to ask you, if I may, to turn to page 141. This is the, forgive me, I probably should, to be completely page 129, it's the start of the representation of D. Wood. And at paragraph 46 at page 141, are the conditions that Ms. Wood has invited you to consider as appropriate steps. So these conditions go over and above what your own expert says is an appropriate and proportionate or appropriate and proportionate steps in relation to this review. Because I think it's always important in situations like this that I go and see my client and I say, okay, because it's very easy for me to walk in and twist a client's arm and say, well, take this and take that, and then I get on my horse and ride off into the sunset, and they have to live with these conditions going forward, and nobody should be signing up to conditions that they can't live with. You know, a licensed business is challenging at the best of times, and it's absolutely wrong as somebody in my position. You know, I suppose I'm paid to persuade for a living, and I'm basically fundamentally still a salesman like I was 30 years ago. It's absolutely wrong that I use undue pressure on my clients when asking them to consider conditions on the business. But I went through these conditions with my 3 clients who sit with me now and said, okay, what can you live with on here? And obviously I gave them advice on what conditions I thought were reasonable and proportionate in the circumstances. So I'm going to take you through each of these because I believe that will demonstrate my client's willingness to accommodate as much as is viable and is feasible for the business, the concerns of the local residents. I've already made it abundantly clear that A will finish the business off. So I didn't even, I did obviously take instructions on that, but I'd already placed a cross next to that prior to having the meeting with my client at the premises. So I'm going to invite you not to consider point A. Point B, I think I've already addressed in that it's already covered by the environmental health condition, and we agree that for that condition to take effect and for it to be enforceable, that section 177A needs to be applied to it. We agree with that. C, not only do we agree with C and accept C, there is in fact a noise limiter on the premises now, and I understand from my client that they have made a number of efforts for environmental health to come down and set that limiter. And at this open hearing, and with everybody here present, I echo that invitation now. We would welcome that limiter being set as soon as officers are available to do so, and for that condition, as it stands, to be imposed on the premises licence going forward. And I suppose at this stage, because it is linked to this, because my instructions have evolved a little in the course of this hearing, inevitably, because Mr. Grant's thrown a couple of further conditions into the mix. My client has no desire to have DJs on the premises, and she is perfectly content for a condition that there are no DJs at the premises. So you'll have a noise limiter and no DJs at the premises. I can't get her to sign up to D. I can't advise her to sign up to D, simply because it's too broad. A nuisance, that could potentially mean, for example, somebody was talking at the front of the pub, somebody could hear it at a neighbouring property, that's potential breach of that condition. I would submit that the rest of the conditions on this licence, in conjunction with each other, are sufficient to address the concerns around the prevention of public nuisance. E, loudspeakers shall not be located in the entrance or exit of the premises or outside the building. Well, I would just delete the words or outside the building, just simply because that's already provided for in another condition. Conditions should not be subject to adjudication in any way. It just leads to confusion. So we accept, the licence holder accepts, the condition, loudspeakers shall not be located in the entrance and exit of the premises. CCTV condition, again, that is accepted, with one proviso. It's a personal little thing of mine, little quirk of mine. I just think 28 days should be sufficient. It's 4 clean weeks. If the police haven't come in 4 weeks, it can't be that serious. I just think 31 days, it just confuses things in terms of some months are 31 days, some months are 28 days is 4 weeks, and that should be more than enough time. So that is the only amendment I would recommend in respect of condition F. We also agree to condition G, that there's always going to be a staff member on the premises who is conversant with the operation of the CCTV system. And so, as Mr Grant suggested, that will give responsible authorities and, I guess, the residents as well, a degree of confidence that if there are issues that need investigating, that the premises is required to comply with those conditions in order that that evidence can be gathered and the truth can be established. H is already dealt with, we would say, in respect of the environmental health conditions in relation to people smoking outside. We've already agreed to that. So what actually my client has agreed to is beyond what environmental health have said is appropriate and proportionate. They've said, okay, we will agree to every condition that's on there, save for duplication and save for one that is not capable of being met, namely D. And so, in that sense, the point of differentiation here is a condition that Mr Grant and others who've made representations want, which we say will finish the business off. And so that really, I guess, remains the point of difference between the parties. My client, I also asked 2 more questions. She's not willing to agree a no barbecue condition. Residential properties can have barbecues in them. I would see that as a disproportionate imposition on the business. And actually, whilst this isn't a black and white thing, it's not a licensable activity. There's no late night refreshment here. And I've ever seen a condition that stops people having barbecues in a licensed premise or in the garden licensed premise. And I don't think I have, but maybe other people have in the room. So I would submit that was a disproportionate imposition. I did ask my client, because there's been some suggestion in one of the representations as if they'd seen 400 people out there. I don't know how 400 people have managed to get outside the front of that pub. I mean, that's actually nuts to me. It's just beyond the laws of physics. But I did ask my client, because there was some suggestion from Mr Grant, there's roughly 96 seats out there, that there were loads of other people standing at the time, and my client's perfectly content in that front area for it to be limited to 100 people. No issue with that at all. So that's a further condition, over and above anything that anybody's asked for, that my client is willing to agree to. So I'll turn now, if I may, to the personnel. It's very... I've always had... I always have to be careful when I talk along these lines. When I was an area manager for a pub company, I learnt very quickly the value of a female licensee. The fact that particularly with a lot of experience, and there's no doubt that the people sat to my right have a huge amount of experience, all 3 of them in fact. And their strong personality, and there's something about a female licensee that they can be strong, and some customers are less inclined to stand up to them because they're female, and they have that certain sort of, I guess, maternal instinct as well around. And when they get it right, they are a real asset, particularly to a community pub. And I had a number of female managers when I was an area manager who were absolutely invaluable. And what you have here, in fact, are three. You have Pat, who is 87 years of age, has been in the pub for 34 years. Prior to that, she was at the Golden Horse, at Forest Gate, the three compasses at Tottenham, the Westbury Arms. She still goes to the pub every day. You have Tracy, who's held licences for 47 years, has been involved in this pub since 1991. She's been a DPS here for 12 years. Her home adjoins the pub. This is her home. You know, she's got no desire to have a business that's at odds with the local community. Not at all. And then you've got Laura. Laura's got a very impressive CV. She's been in the trade since 2008, which is 14 years, which seems crazy, but yeah, it's 14 years since 2008. She's operated and run bars not just in this country but in Spain as well. Perhaps crucially, she worked for Antique at the Red Lion at Leytonstone, and what was the other one? Sorry.
After that was the Forest Tavern in Forest Gate.
Forest Tavern and Forest Gate. Both, crucially, can be quite challenging pubs to run. Both working within a corporate environment, because I think it's right to say, for all her strengths, perhaps Tracy is more of perhaps a people person, more of a traditional landlady, and it's right that for me to concede that the requirements upon a licensed business have evolved in recent years. The regulatory burden that is placed upon them has increased. The requirements to keep records, to do risk assessments, to try and analyse risk going forward is much greater than it once was. It just used to be about, frankly, opening the doors and turning the tills on, and that was what the job was about. And of course the world's changed, everything's changed in the last 20, 30, 40 years. And what you have here is somebody who is, and you can obviously ask questions of her about her capabilities and her experience, but somebody here, and I've spoken to her, I've said to her, I said, look, if at the end of this review we're in a position where these conditions are imposed as we are inviting the subcommittee to do, be under no illusions that you are going to be under the microscope, both in terms of the residents, in terms of the enforcement bodies, and more generally. And it's absolutely, you know, if I walk away and I've done my job, your job doesn't end there. You've got to ensure, for example, that no ifs, no buts, that terrace is cleared by 9 o'clock. No ifs, no buts, the dispersals policy is reviewed every 6 months. No ifs, no buts. I mean, not that this is particularly going to be challenging in terms of external speakers. I mean, external speakers aren't just going to grow on the wall, are they? So, but my point being that I am saying this in an open forum to you as a licensing subcommittee, because I think it's right that I do, given what is being asked by those who made representations of this business, to finish it off basically, that my client is under no illusions that environmental health have taken a stepped approach. I think environmental health have been very fair, and I think they've been very proportionate in these proceedings and more generally. And it's absolutely right that my client recognises that going forward, and look, I need to tackle this. Last summer there were issues. There were. Tracy was away for a lot of June, and that's not a carte blanche. That's not a complete get out of jail card. Because a license, or people who were involved in a license business, she was a DPS at the time, and her mum's a license holder, have to take measures when they're not around to ensure. But she was let down by people, and that's why she accepted into under caution that there'd been breaches. But Lots of businesses at that time were breaching. Lots of businesses at that time were having huge issues controlling customers. People have been locked away for months. People couldn't go to lots of licensed premises. Of course it was challenging for the trade. And what you're being invited to do by Mr. Grant and those who instruct him is to say, well, yeah, you've had this pub for 34 years and you've been a huge benefit to the community in all that time. But during a time that was especially challenging, when lots of people were difficult to manage, and they absolutely were, because of that, we want to take your business away from you. That is effectively what they are saying. They might be shaking their heads now, but that is the reality of what they are asking and inviting you to do. And we would say that that is both wholly disproportionate and completely unfair, given all that I have said about these premises and the history of them. So I'm now going to turn, if I may, to the representations, because there are a number of people, there are some people here today who've made positive representations about the premises, who are perfectly capable of speaking for themselves. And there are as well a number of them that aren't here, and I think it's right that I get their voice across, because this is not a usual nuisance-related review. It's unusual. I don't think Mr. Grant would disagree with this. It's unusual to get this number of individual letters of support. Yes, there's a petition. I don't normally make any particular play on petitions. I don't think they carry a huge amount of weight. People have a petition placed in front of them. They'll generally, path of least resistance is often to sign it. I'm not going to make a great play on that. But I think there are a significant number of signatories on there. The petition was started before the review application, way before the review application. And I think that number of signatures is something that you can, to some extent, take into account. But I don't, for a second, suggest that you should do overwhelmingly so. So if we just invite you now to turn to page 77. Organised, I promise you. Right, I'm just going to take some snippets out of this because I think it's important, because there's been some characterisation of a lot of these representations of people who are just using the pub, they're dipping in from outside the area. That simply does not accord with what I've read in here. So, page 77, I'm just going to take certain snippets. First paragraph, I have lived yards away from the pub since 1984 and have never been disturbed by noise. It is a meeting place for local people. Third paragraph, the pub is not responsible for the green, but does clear it of rubbish left by people who nowadays order food not from the pub, but from pizza places and other takeaway establishments, and then have a picnic. Final paragraph, there are several neighbours who've made it their mission to close the pub. It begs the question, why would someone buy a property close by a pub which has been in existence since the 16th century? I don't necessarily fully endorse that point. I don't think people who live next door to a pub should have to expect an unreasonable level of interference with their life. But they have to expect some interference with their life. That's the reality of living next to a pub. And I suppose it's down to you to evaluate what is proportionate and what's an proportionate level of interference in the circumstances. Page 78. Just an acknowledgement there that there was the second paragraph. Well, first, the pub has always been very well managed. There was a period of about 3 to 4 weeks after the first lockdown. There was a blip with a lot of noise and trouble when a crowd of youngsters started coming to the pub. The management dealt with it appropriately, and since then it has been run very professionally. Page 79. I've been frequenting the pub for some 46 years now. To the best of my recollection, the current licence holder has been there for the past 30 years. She is a kind, welcoming person and takes great pride in the way the pub is run. It goes on to say, unfortunately, at the end of lockdown, there were several incidents reported to the police of bad and noisy behaviour on the green at the top of York Hill and opposite the pub. This became a gathering place for some local youths who understandably need to let off steam, having been shut away for months on end. It then goes on to say, it goes on to I have to vocalise this on behalf of this person. I've been from one or two households living directly adjacent to the pub has been, in my opinion, now become a vendetta against the pub and its landlady. I very much doubt that any other licence holder could run this pub in a better way or provide the ongoing welcome, good beer and excellent food to young families. Page 80. Please accept this representation and support the Gardens Arms. We have lived in Pump Hill for 8 years, less than 100 yards from the pub. During this time, we have not experienced any disturbance at all. It then goes on to say about the green, and unfortunately this noise interruption from the groups above was blamed on the pub, but in fact it was a totally different issue. Page 81, please. I've always regarded this wonderful old pub and the longest standing publican as pillars of our community. I've never witnessed anything on the pub premise that could be construed as a public nuisance. During lockdown, when the pub was closed, there were some gatherings of young people who seemed to adopt the green as a place to meet and enjoy themselves. This was not the fault or responsibility of the pub, although Tracy regularly cleaned up the mess left on the green. Goes on to say, when my husband fell ill in 2019 and spent many weeks in Whipps Cross Hospital, I was given a very supportive welcome by the pub. We live at the back of the Plume of Feathers nearby, but accept there will be noise from a pub with a garden. Page 82. Queen's Road. As a resident that has lived in the local area in close proximity to the Gardens Arms for more than 25 years, and having known and used the premises for more than 40 years, I can see no grounds for refusing a licence. I think that, perhaps the vernacular is slightly inaccurate there, but I think we all know what the sentiment is on the grounds of public nuisance, as I have not witnessed or been informed of any antisocial behaviour or excessive noise attributed to this establishment that would disrupt its neighbours. Quite the contrary, I feel that this Gardens Arms is an asset and a positive contributor to the benefit of the local community, an established landmark that should not be lost. Page 83. I've visited this pub for over 20 years and have always found this pub to be welcoming, friendly and a very important part of our community. The landlady has always, in my opinion, gone to great efforts to ensure this 16th century pub is always a nice place where people can socialise and chat. I'm amazed that the witch hunt has been escalated by a few people in a position to try and get the pub closed, citing unruly and antisocial behaviour. This is not the case at all. Page 84. I'll just say the pub is an absolute asset, especially with the outdoor seating. Page 85. I lived in Loughton on Queen's Road, just a couple of hundred yards from the pub, for 8 years now, and have found the pub to be a real credit to the local area. I've been to this pub dozens of times and never witnessed any problems. It is a popular family pub which we visit after forest walks and sit outside with our children. Page 86. Regarding the so-called antisocial problems for the Gardens Arms, I'm a regular and have never seen any problems of the sort in all the years I have visited. Page 87. To restrict a business that has been in operation for many years on the grounds of that acceptable noise and activity is unacceptable and would have a detrimental effect on the fabric of this town. Page 88, I'm going through them one by one because they all speak positively about the premises. I'll just say this person here says that they live locally. I want to give feedback as somebody who lives locally. Visit the Gardens Arm pub. The seating outside is beautiful and I will often bring family. Page 89. As with any pub, noise spills out onto the street as revellers depart. When purchasing this house in this area, we were sensible enough to choose a property in a road further back from the Gardener's Arms, as we did not want to be disturbed by noise. However, our daughter and her husband, who live in Waller's Hoppit, and whose garden backs onto the small green across the road from the Gardener's Arms, are not concerned about any noise and expect it to be troublesome at times, which is predictable living so close to any pub. Page 90. I've drank in this pub for many years and have never seen any disturbance inside or out. It is a joy to sit outside during the summer and take in the lovely view over to London. Page 91. I've had the privilege to meet and get to know Tracy on a personal level, and I can assure you Tracy is a lovely individual who does all in her power not to cause a nuisance to local residents. Tracy is an honest hard worker who is liked by all. I know how much the industry means to Tracy, and I will echo that, by the way, and I know how much she loves her work and her business. Hence why I felt the need to email over my thoughts of a pub that is the hub of the local community. Any change to the pub would be a shame and a huge loss to the area. Page 92. I've been attending this pub for over 5 years on a regular basis, and on no occasion have I experienced any behaviour of any sort that I would consider inappropriate or excessive, whether by reason of the type of behaviour or external noise levels. Page 93, replacing amending on page 100. Quite a lot to get through though. I've been using the Gardener's Arms since 1968 and I've lived 50 yards away since 1984. In that time I've never heard any noise or disturbance from the pub. The noise that a few residents have complained about came from young people on the green outside smoking wacky-backy. Goes on to mention rubbish on there and litter, and says Tracy and her staff clear this up. It does go on to say another neighbour has a personal grudge against the licensee. I don't know who that is, but I'm just quoting what's in here, and stated that they want her out. They even suggested that they or the locals could buy the pub lease and turn it into a community pub. Page 94. I've lived local to the Gardener's Arms for over 20 years. During that period, I used on a regular basis what it offers. No doubt a few situations have arisen and resolved by the management to the satisfaction of the local residents. I'm sure with reasonable discussions and due diligence, a solution will be found. Page 95. I purchased my home back in June 2021. Just to say, as a closely positioned neighbour of the said property, approximately 80 to 100 metres, I see no grounds to adjust the licence hours. I purchased my home back in June 21. As with any sensible person buying the property so close to a public house, I had reservation in regards to possible issues with parking and noise disturbance. I carried out several visits to the area at various times of the week and day. I also looked up locally on social media to get a broader view of the area and the pub's reputation. Pubs like to be negative on social media rather than being positive. People like to be negative on social media rather than being positive. My research concluded in me being unable to find any alarming problem, hence I moved in. It goes on to say, to be factual, the only disturbance and antisocial behaviour I do experience in my property is people who visit York Hill, sit on the green where the benches used to be. Page 96. I live in Queen's Road and my house is about 200 metres from the Gardener's Arms. I'm only very occasionally a customer of the pub, but I frequently walk past its location during the day or evening. On the vast majority of these occasions, there is no sign of rowdiness, excessive noise, or other antisocial behaviour. There is never a noise from the pub audible in my garden. Page 97. I've been a regular at this pub for over 40 years, and during that period, little has changed. The current management has always been doing a responsible job, even extended to clearing rubbish from the green opposite, not their responsibility. Drinks from that pub are not allowed on the green. Page 98. We have lived here for 27 years and have always been regular customers of this pub. And they are part of our community, and during lockdown they would deliver food and drink to our elderly neighbour who lives above us. We cannot praise Tracy and Pat enough They are not only wonderful people, but they are good licensees. To lose them would be devastating for the whole community. Page 99. I live in Queen's Road, and my house is about 200 metres from the Gardener's Arms. There is never any noise from the pub audible in my garden. This pub has been at this location for well over 100 years and is, in my view, a valuable community asset. I would be most reluctant to see it closed or so restricted so as to make it uneconomic to operate as a business. And lastly, page 100. Thenceforth, I am shocked that there have been neighbouring houses of the public house complaining about noise. I've been here most days of the week and also weekends. He obviously, again, he lives locally. Clients are mostly local to the area during the day, and the late afternoon, evening, people like me outside the area and willing to travel, coming to the area, the very welcoming public house. For the disturbance and antisocial behaviour that's apparently happening, I stay at my friend's place very frequently. He stays at his friend's, forgive me, it's a stone's away from the public house, forgive me on that. I have not experienced any of this, and the room I sleep with is at the front of the building. I can see the Gardener's Arms from the window, and with single glazing, I do not hear loud noises or antisocial behaviour. I apologise for taking you through all those to some extent, but I think it's important. You've had a premises described to you from the other side of the room that disturbs people in the locality pretty much all the time. Well, I have to say, if that were the case, and if the situation was as described, it is inconceivable that all these local people would write in individually of each other, and not just a couple of lines. You've got letters here of support that go into significant detail. It is inconceivable that these people would write in if the premises were as it has been described to you by Mr. Grant. It would actually be absurd for that to be the case. There are clearly issues, and have been issues, with the premises during 2020 and 2021. But as I've said, and has been agreed by Environmental Health, this is a balancing exercise. And if you are to follow Mr. Grant's suggestion to effectively close this business down, you are ignoring the representations of all these people who've taken the time to write in and say, I don't have any problems with this place. I live nearby. Doesn't cause me any problems. It's a big asset. Got some great operators here who are an asset to the local community. Please don't take it away. And I would just please, on behalf of my clients, invite you to balance those representations, which are cogent, that are powerful, that are clearly, sincerely written by people who live locally, and take those in conjunction. And what we are inviting you to do is not to do nothing. It's not to say, well, things are fine as they are. We accept there have to be issues, and we also accept that there has to be a greater level of compliance going forward. And that is, I suppose, part of this process. There's been a minor variation, and now we find ourselves in a more formal setting and a review where you are charged with taking appropriate steps. But what my client has agreed to here is not what Environmental Health have suggested. It goes well beyond that, which is, I would submit, an express and clear demonstration to you that they accept there has to be a recalibration of these premises, but not to the extent that it finishes the business off. I was, in the interval, I was bombarded by a number of people with various things. I'm going to try and cherry pick them as best I can in terms of picking up on matters that were, and please, anyone who sits to my right, if there's anything that I miss off that's of particular importance. Let me just go through the representations against the premises. I think it's right that they do that as well. First of all, I'm just going to go through these in bullet point form. It's right, isn't it? Jeff Woods was never the manager at any point, is that right?
Jeff Allen.
Jeff Allen?
No, he was
never the manager because it's been asserted he was. In terms of Tracy's son, Joseph, that there seems to be some fait accompli that's been presented to you, that somehow that there was some sort of public order offence that's gone on. Well, what happened was he was interviewed under caution because there was an allegation made, because there was a crime number, and no further action was taken. Well, that isn't evidence of anything, quite frankly. You're being invited to speculate on that. That frankly, is gone nowhere. Sorry?
The police apologised for wasting his time.
Right, okay. Well, there you go. The police apologised to him for wasting the time. Any allegations of intimidation by Tracy's son are completely denied. And some criticism has been levelled at my client for making spurious and unfounded allegations. Well, I think I've been at pains not to descend into that. But I think it's right to say that that allegation is robustly denied and is wrong and is false. And I think it's right that I vocalise that to the room. Allegations, page 114, of fights. Allegations at page 115, the pub's association with drug dealing. Where are the police? I don't see the police. They've not made any representations. If these premises were the epicentre of criminality in the local area, why did the police not make any representation? Why did the police not object to Laura being the DPS? They were perfectly entitled to do that. They didn't think she was suitable. They didn't object to that. So any suggestions that these places are a bastion of criminality in any way is simply wrong. The police aren't here. They haven't made any representations. If they had any concerns about these premises, they would have attached themselves to this review, because this would have been their opportunity to invite you to take whatever steps they felt were appropriate, be that further conditions on the licence. I mean, look, this is a premises licence that, as things stand today, doesn't have a CCTV condition. Doesn't have a CCTV condition. The police haven't even made a representation on the review. And that, I would submit, speaks to where the truth lies about criminality in association with these premises, because that wasn't the case. They'd be sat somewhere in this room and making representations, because they doubtless recognise the value that Tracy and Pat, in particular, and the history here, bring to the local community. Otherwise, they'd be here. It's as simple as that. I'll just deal, I think at page 116, first of all, suggestions like 400 people outside at any one time. That is a preposterous figure. Just not possible. So I don't know where that's come from. And it also goes on to say the Garden I'm going to take on the guise of a nightclub. It's the only nightclub I know that closes at 11 o'clock, or stops selling alcohol at 11 o'clock, and doesn't have regulated entertainment on the licence. References at page 112 to cars and parking. Well, not really central to the promotion of the licensing objectives. Some suggestion of people speeding cars. I'm struggling to accept that. I have to say that. I'm driven up there yesterday. I don't know how any car could speed up that road. It's very tight indeed. And so I'm not going to forensically go through, but there are a number of falsehoods, inaccuracies, exaggerations within the representations that have been made against the premises, which I hope I have suitably dealt with in broad terms. Just a few more things before I said I was going to be an hour. I'm a little over. Well, I'm paid to talk for a living, I guess. Some further steps that Tracy's taken. Some suggest she's not taken. She's just sat on her hands. She got rid of the security company when they weren't doing their job. You've installed an ID scanner. The picket fence, I think, was in consultation with the council. in order to provide an element of delineation between the premises and the highway. I have been asked in the strongest possible terms by Laura to vocalise to the room, you did not organise any of the music events.
Doing a degree at the time, doing my exams in that period, which I've deferred. Just round up.
The canisters, well, look, canisters are everywhere, I'm afraid. That's a sad reflection on society, and I think it's reasonable to conclude that a number of people will be doing those canisters on the green. In fact, I'm probably expect you've seen that, have you?
Yes.
But to suggest that's somehow that's
I reported it to the police as well.
right. I know there was some from environmental health question about level of correspondence, but hopefully that's been addressed. But you've been corresponding with Hayden a lot, haven't you, from licensing? And you just want to make it clear that the video compilation we saw, that they were the only times the police were ever called. Is that correct?
Well, I wasn't. Yeah, they weren't during my tenure, but having spoken to Tracy, they've been very much so. The emphasis was as if they were just a select few of a numerous incidents of that type, and that's not the case.
Right. So, nearly done. Well, she can ask you a question about the limiter.
Okay.
So, if you've got any questions about the limiter, you can ask. What is the purpose of the licensing regime? It's to provide a balancing exercise between the joy and the benefit that licensed premises bring to people, and you can be in no doubt from the representations that have been made in support of these premises that they have brought a lot of joy and happiness to people, brought people together in difficult times. Against the negative impact that licensable activities can have upon individuals and the local community. And that's why we have licensing laws. That's why it's such a heavily regulated activity. That's why we have the licensing objectives. So, they have to balance those negative, they're used as deployed as a tool, as a balancing exercise against the negative impact that all licensed premises can potentially have on the wider community. But please don't ignore the benefit that these premises have had for people in the local area. You have clear evidence of that. If you follow what Mr Grant is suggesting and exclude the external area, the area manager has said herself, these premises are not viable and they will close. It's as simple as that. And so what I hope I've provided for you today on behalf of my clients is a framework for them to work to, that will be set by you as a licensing subcommittee, and so there can be no doubt about what they need to do going forward. This has been ventilated in a public hearing, and they have given up significant amounts here, particularly in terms of the 9 o'clock, the external speakers, the noise limiter, obviously the restrictions on the external area, and we say that this is a fair and balanced compromise, not just taking into account the people sat on the other side of the room, but taking into account the representations that have been made in favour of the premises. The fact there's only one responsible authority who's sat in this room, who is the responsible authority who brought the review, so they've got no option but to be here. They can't withdraw a review once it's submitted. And please allow my client to continue in this place into year 35 and year 36, because that is something that large members of the local community, and you have clear evidence on this point, would absolutely welcome. And so I'll just finish by saying there are some residents behind me who I think want to speak, and I would be grateful if you would afford them that opportunity. And of course, we're happy to answer any questions that anyone may have at the appropriate time. And
Okay.
thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Now, who else would like to speak?
Peter Spratt, I live in Pump Hill, very close to the pub. Gentleman over there who's now gone said he read out a statement from the Hills Amenity Society. I'm a fully paid member of that society. No one's consulted me or any of my other neighbours. So what right have they got to make a statement on our behalf when we've got nothing, they haven't asked us? No, that's it.
That was a question you had the opportunity of asking him at the time. You didn't.
No one asked this side to ask any questions. I thought it was us and them. But
Okay, right, it's about time. Anybody else?
I'm also a member of the Hills Amenity Society, and he didn't speak on my behalf either. Just one comment I'd like. I wrote a letter, and I think some of its contents has been quoted. I live in Queen's Road, about 200 metres away from the pub. The impression has been given that, apart from the pub, this is a completely quiet, sort of almost retired area. And I've got to say that noise in my garden comes from private parties.
Just wait, are you in favour of the pub, or are you...
I'm in favour of the pub.
Okay.
Chair, it's like a wedding. This is the bride's son.
Okay.
Please continue.
Okay, so the noise that I hear in my garden that disturbs me, generally speaking, comes from private parties, and the pub is not, in my perception, any noisier than many of the private parties that take place in this conservation area.
Okay, thank you. Laura, do you want to say anything at all? Or press the microphone on.
Sorry, I'm really tense, and I'm not sure if I'd be able to articulate myself very well, but I suppose I resent the fact that it's been implied that I wouldn't be a suitable DPS because I've had a hand in some of these incidents that have led to this, which is just not the case at all. And again, I've held a licence for a very long time, and as Duncan mentioned, I have a corporate background as well. I've been a legal secretary. I've sort of dipped in and out of hospitality on both sides of it. I've been a PA in hospitality, and to suggest that I would be encouraging Tracy to breach the terms of her licence or any notices attached to it, I find it offensive. And yeah, forgive my sort of murmurings earlier, because it is quite hard to contain that thought. And some of these things are being stated as facts, which just aren't, and it's really hard to swallow, and it makes me quite emotional. It's just not very fair. Sorry.
Okay, right.
And even down to just then when Duncan mentioned the limiter, Nikki, perhaps I misconstrued your expression, but she looked very shocked at that. Tracy presented this at her PACE hearing that it had been installed, and we've been asking the council for a decibel limit since that day. And we've not been able to give it, so that noise limiter is now redundant, and our neighbours are asking for this too. So we're now, both sides are asking for the same thing, so we can operate.
Okay.
Sorry, that's
right.
all I have to say.
Is anybody else want to speak? Right, we'll get on to questions. Councillor Kesker, you have questions.
I'll preface that by saying I think it's a great shame that this clearly was a community pub that brought everyone together. And what we're seeing today is something that split the community, which is extremely sad. I will, however, go over one or two of the points that were brought up, if I might. on page 86, Mr. Can said that there had not been any increase in outdoor seating. Can I just ask the team, you don't actually accept that, do you? There has been an increase in outdoor seating.
Can I get to 80? Sorry, can I get to 86, please?
Page 86. I don't think... Is that a yes or a no?
I'm not known for not answering the question that's posed. Sorry.
Go.
Right. It is accepted that seating has increased over the last 9 years. Absolutely. The only point I'll make is that is a very loosely worded. It doesn't say when, from, and to. But yes, we accept that seating has increased. Absolutely. You'll always get a straight answer out of me, Councillor. Even Mr. Grant, I expect, would agree with that. I will always answer questions put to me, but I have to sometimes qualify it, and I will just make the point. It doesn't say from when to when, but we accept, yes, the number of seats has increased. Yes.
Thank you. Okay. Next one, a number of the letters written in support of the pub said that there was no noise or antisocial behaviour. Now, we have heard from the council officers, both Mr Glasscock and other Epping Forest District Council officers, that they have been called on a number of occasions and have found that there was noise and antisocial behaviour. Do you accept that that is the case?
Sorry, certainly. Well, look, yes, is the answer to that. It has. If officers have visited and have made those findings in respect of those particular properties at that time of night, then I can't have it both ways. These officers are the experts in their field, and that has been their finding. But then you have a number of other people who also live locally who say that they don't have any nuisance issues with the premises. But certainly, I've got no reason to go behind that finding, and it would be wrong of me to do that.
They're witnessed by officers. There's only two occasions.
On those two occasions,
There have been lots
yes.
of complaints, but only two witnessed by officials.
Yes. Sorry, one second. I'll answer it.
Yeah, that's right. We accept what's been... thank you. We accept what Environmental Health have put forward, but I feel to fully answer that question so that nothing is misled, my understanding is that a number of reports have been put in against the premises to various authorities, including the police, and the result of those clearly hasn't found great problems, or else you'd see the police here and what have you. But in answer to the question, the direct question, yes, we totally accept what Environmental Health say. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for that. The fact that the police are not here I regard as important, because in many cases the police are here represented either by a civilian officer or even in some cases by a uniformed officer. If I could just then go on to the current DPS, Laura, clearly up till now the DPS has been a member of the family living on the premises. Can I take it that you have simply a professional connection with this premises and you don't live on the premises? Yes? Okay, that's fine. I am only too well aware DPS does not have to be on the premises all the time. They simply have to be the responsible person. And again, perhaps I could ask, just to be absolutely clear, that you have said that if the outside seating is restricted to what it was a number of years ago, that the pub would close. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just as a minor point, but given what we've just gone through for the last couple of years, people are still very cautious about coming inside. People do still wear masks inside and prefer to sit outside. So that is, we are very much reliant on that still. There's locals, very local people that like to come to the pub. Yeah, and older people. So yeah, it's very much crucial to this operation.
Councillor Lyon.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, you've said that going forward that the pub's going to be under the microscope to make sure things are dealt with properly. Looking back on some of the statements that have been made and the various noise abatement orders since 2017, things have continued to not work necessarily according to some of those directions. And we saw on some of that video, police had been attended. So I'd like to know what assurances we can get that, having not dealt with them properly in the past, they are going to be dealt with going forward.
I'll answer it first, just well, simply because matters have been, from a practical point of view, matters have been stepped up, and my client, well, I've made my client clear aware. You're in a review hearing here, and if you're giving assurances to members in that setting, in a public setting with a number of people in the room, you are putting your neck on the line to ensure that you are going to deliver as you promise. And so I suppose from a practical point of view, that's the reality of where my client finds themselves. That's the truth of it. There's no sugarcoating that. That's the reality. I know you've got anything to say about that. But I mean, obviously you're the DPS.
Well, I suppose, yeah, that there is no two ways about it. You know, we have to adhere to these new conditions, and that, like I say, these incidents. I suppose it is that a pub, people are consuming alcohol. It is like a mind-altering substance. That there are going to be incidents, and there are going to be, well, you endeavour to prevent those, but there is a higher risk of that than there is in, say, Tesco's. You know, and it's that's obviously, yeah. We've as far as the environmental side of things and the music, we've obviously put a complete stop to that. But as far as any sort of disturbances and things like that, we have got a very strict policy now. And even again last night, we had to bar a customer for just being he's just got his voice travels and he's loud. So he's been told he can't come to the pub anymore. And he was questioning the smoking policy and why he wasn't allowed his drink outside and why the time had changed. And he was calling me last night, and it's just as simple as that. And he's not caused any, there've been no incidents of trouble with him.
He's got a loud voice.
Yeah, but he's not, that's it, we're having to, that's all we can do. We've got to safeguard, there's...
Ourselves.
Yeah.
Remind me not to come to the pub then.
No, exactly, well, me too, my voice travels.
Another question, carry on.
Yeah, I'm just going to come back on that because it's, exactly right. I mean, this is your business. And you're saying if the outside is closed, you can't continue. Well, that's your responsibility to make sure. And if we have to come back again, then I think that is vitally important that you understand, because these incidents here where they have been repeated and information has been given and various assurances have been given to the council, they haven't been fulfilled. So I'd like to make sure that that is understood.
I think clients have to accept.
Okay. Just one question for you, Laura. I know as DPS you can't be there all the time. You've got a number of personal licence holders in the property?
We have a second one in there presently, so there's only one other than me. Obviously, Tracy has a personal licence, which is not...
Okay.
We did have another one prior to this. He was a bar manager. So that's what I mean. I've never been the bar manager. It was compliance, health and safety, things like that I've been trying to get up to speed for the pub. That's where my focus is and always has been. And as far as events goes, it's the wakes, christenings, things like that, the costing of the food. I organise that side of things. I've gone off on a tangent now. I'm nervous.
Anyway, don't worry, that's fine.
What was the question I was answering?
You answered it fine.
Okay, good.
Okay, you've answered the question.
Sorry.
No other questions? Right, so just have you any...
just a few, if I may.
For the, or anybody, really.
Thank you. Really, just Miss Walker, are you still a full-time Bachelor of Arts student at Goldsmith College? Sorry? You've deferred it? All right. When do you return to education? Okay. Who's your employer? Who? Pat. And do you answer to Tracy as well? So who would you say is your boss? Pat? Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? All right, Ms Glasgow.
It's not a question as such, but I just wanted to clarify something in terms of the noise limiter, which was mentioned, which I know that you clocked onto. Yes, it is true to say that Tracy did inform me in the PACE interview that a noise limiter has been installed in the premises. However, there was a suggestion made that they have been in contact with the council for us to set the noise limiter. Nobody has ever been in contact with me to set the noise limiter, so that is why there was confusion. There isn't a decibel limit that we can set and say that... No, if I could just clarify, okay, there is not a decibel limit that I can give you and say if you have your music below that limit, you are not going to cause a nuisance. That is not possible and I can't do that, and you were advised of that. However, the way it's been suggested is that people have been contacting the council to get us to come out and set a noise limiter, and we have refused to do so. That is not the case. I have not been contacted and I have not refused to do that.
Anyone suggested there's been a refusal to do it? I mean, it hasn't been done. I don't think that's in dispute, and I don't know whether what efforts have been made, but I don't think anyone suggested you've gone, I'm not doing it. I don't think anyone said that, I don't think. So if that's the case, perhaps not quite as to the extent that you thought. Well, look, I think the reality is, assuming that is a step the subcommittee decide to take, then at least you know now, and that would be something that would be welcomed by the premises, so thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Now we'll come to the final bit. Just the, as we do with the applicant, don't we? Yes. Just a few words, Mr. Grant, if you want to say anything without anything new, just a few words at the end.
When it was suggested that you perhaps limit the front area to 100 people, you may have heard the gasp of despair from my clients behind me. Because if the outcome of today's review is that there can be up to 100 people outside drinking every day until 9 p.m, then the consequence of that is to condemn my clients to suffering for many more years to come. That's the consequence. It is no surprise that the pub grasped as quickly as they could the proposals of Miss Glasscock, which Miss Glasscock, no doubt being charitable and bending over as much as she could to be fair, perhaps went in too low. Because it really does not have much effect on the intensification of use of the outside area to effectively simply say, clear it at 9 p.m, not 10 p.m. Bearing in mind the levels of nuisance that are established beyond adventure, both before and after 9 p.m. And it's not just from my clients, as Councillor Keska rightly focused on. This has been objectively verified by council officers on several occasions. So, is it fair that my clients, who are the ones who live closest to the pub, it's unsurprising for you to hear that people who may live the equivalent of that wall there suffer more than someone who lives 200 metres away? That's unsurprising. But the pub has to operate so it doesn't cause a public nuisance even to the closest residents who I represent. What do we know? We know that for 150 years plus, this was a viable pub. We know that, we think in the 1960s, the Horseshoe Terrace area, that was the only external drinking area. It was about 20, 25 people, we understand, could sit at tables within that Horseshoe Terrace area. We know that when that was the reality, the pub was, one, viable, and two, did not cause unreasonable public nuisance to the residents who lived closest. So faced with that, what is appropriate and proportionate? And Miss Glasscock was the first to admit that she could only make suggestions based on what her officers had seen. She didn't have the benefit of all of the evidence that's before you now from the 15 residents, the resident groups, the town council, Councillor Pond, the Amenity Society, that go beyond what Miss Glasscock and her own officers could personally witness. So having heard all of that, it is not unreasonable to suggest there needs to be slightly more robust steps taken to hit the right balance. So what do we suggest? We would like there to be no outdoor drinking at all. But not everyone gets what they want in these sort of hearings when there are competing interests. So what we would propose, by way of a compromise, although we do so with some trepidation, is as follows. If I could perhaps ask you to bring up the conditions within D. Wood's representation, page 141. So you'll see under paragraph 46, there's the original condition that she sought, if you're minded to give the pub another chance. And that is, customers are not permitted to take drinks outside the pub or to consume alcohol in any external area, and to add these words, which I'll dictate, if I may, for your consideration. Save for a maximum of 25 people seated at tables within the horseshoe terraced area only, and tables and chairs in other external areas are to be removed. And that horseshoe area is to be cleared by 9 p.m. Now, what that will do is essentially put us back to before the huge intensification over the last 7-8 years or so, put us back into a state that the pub operated in for scores of years as a viable business, but is less likely to cause the levels of nuisance that my clients have had to suffer. The operator has accepted the no DJs condition, which we welcome. And given what you would have read in the statements about the effect of fumes and smoke and odours from the outside cooking, we do ask that that is added as a condition, that there shall be no outdoor cooking or barbecues in the external areas of the pub. So that, we say, would be a reasonable compromise that at least gives my clients some hope that they can begin to get back to a peaceful life. If I could just finish with addressing a few other areas. When it is said by an operator that the business won't be viable if you do X, Y, Z, please take that with a pinch of salt unless you've got expert evidence before you. There's no viability studies here that suggest anything of the sort. It is a claim often made and rarely made out. None of the residents who support the pub live as close to the pub as my residents. So please bear that in mind when you look at the impact from other residents. The new DPS, Laura Walker, I have no doubt she's well-meaning, but please bear in mind that as early as June 2021, she is already in a management role, events management, and was at the meeting with the council officer to discuss a breach of the noise abatement notice. And within 2 months of that meeting that Laura Walker attended, there were 2 further breaches of the noise abatement notice that led to the PACE interview in September. So that is not an excellent track record for the start of Laura Walker's management. And if I may just have a moment. you're absolutely right when you characterise this as a pub that was supposed to bring the community together, but instead has divided them. We have suggested a way forward here that my clients don't like, that the pub won't like, but it might be the compromise that allows the community once again to rally together with the pub as the community hub. But any less than just the Horseshoe area condemns my clients to more misery of the sort that you've heard about. And we ask that that is taken into proper consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Microphone. Thank you.
All right, we'll come to you next. Let's just finish the conversation.
Sorry. First of all, Laura sends her apologies. A dog, she didn't expect it to go on so long. She's obviously never heard me and Mr. Grant speak before, but she's had to go because a dog was. So she sends her apologies. But I told her things were wrapping up, so the questions were over. She didn't need to. And she does say just what would you. And I didn't say this, of course. She was a great. It's my fault for omitting it. It was great strange to say that the allegation that she was at a particular meeting, that wasn't the case. That's correct, isn't it?
Was that? Laura made a point at the start, it wasn't her. It's in the papers. There was something where it mentions Laura being the manager on charge, but it wasn't.
It was.
Yeah, it wasn't her. Anyway, that's a slight aside. It's not principal part of some submissions. Mr. Grant has gone from saying the outdoor area shouldn't be used at all. At the very last minute, has asked you then to consider a completely new proposition. I mean, he says that there aren't any experts at this side of the room. Well, the area manager's here. He didn't ask any questions of her. He had the opportunity to do that. I made it abundantly clear that she had said, somebody you've seen the representation from Goss Chalk, which is clear that they're neutral on the point. I made it clear that she thinks the pub is not viable with no external area, or for that matter, a greatly reduced external area. He didn't challenge her on that. He was perfectly in a position to do that. He didn't put that to her, in fact. So that's slightly disappointing. He didn't take that opportunity when it was available. She sits at the back of the room now, and she was perfectly willing to answer any questions in relation to that. I don't agree, in fact, that the suggestion that the people that Mr. Grant represent all the people that live closest to the pub. In fact, Mrs. Fox says her daughter lives 50 yards away. You have also representations from people who overlook the Gardener's Arms. There are a number of representations here from people who live, if not closer, but certainly in the same vicinity as those who sit the other side of the room. My client could have sat here and gone, well, look, Environmental Health has suggested this, and we're happy to agree with that, and that's what you should follow. They haven't. They've gone further than that. They've voluntarily and unilaterally gone further than that. I've discussed with them what they can live with that makes their business still viable, and of the conditions that were suggested in the representations of D Wood. Sorry, forgive me, at page 141, they're pretty much all been agreed to, save for one that will render the business unviable. So that is a proportionate balancing exercise. That is a compromise that both parties may have to feel they've had to give a little bit up. But Please do not base your decision just on the representations that are sat on the other side of this room, because you have clear evidence from a number of other people who live locally who do not agree with those representations. And I would respectfully invite you to balance that out against the history of these premises, the fact it's only licensed till 11 o'clock at night, but it doesn't have regulated entertainment on there. It won't have external speakers going forward. The external area will need to be cleared by 9 o'clock. Imposing some... Mr Grant may wish to turn the clock back to 2013. I'd love to turn the clock back to 2013. I'd have the same waistline as I did in 2013, but unfortunately the world has changed, and my client is perfectly entitled to run their business in a legitimate way, in a way that balances their interests against those of the local community. And the proposal that is before you now from them does that in a way that is adequate and promotes the licensing objective both purposefully and responsibly on their behalf. And so I would invite you to add those conditions to the licence. You clearly don't need to change the DPS anymore, and add those conditions to the licence. And hopefully that will form a basis for some healing in the local community. But I accept there is division in the local community, but included in that is a huge amount of support. And please don't ignore that. And thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Mr. Oakley? Any questions? No questions.
So the only thing I will... So the only thing I would say, sir, is that you have to consider Article 1 of the First Protocol of the Human Rights Act. Everyone is entitled to a peaceful enjoyment of their possessions, in this case the licence, and no one should be deprived of their possessions except in the public interest and subject to conditions provided for by law and by the general principles of international law. And has been repeatedly said in this meeting, any decision made in respect to the premises licence must be necessary and proportionate.
Thank you very much. Right, thank you. We will retire and consider the application. I'll consider it will be 3:30 at least before we get back. If anybody wants to go out for a walk, they can do. Okay, thank you. Yeah. We have certainly listened to all's been said from both sides, and also read all the correspondence. In fact, I think most of us have read it twice. But I didn't say so. We have seen the premises. I know what they look like. What I'm going to do is ask our legal advisor to read out our decision, please.
Right, this is the decision sheet relating to a review of premises licence, where the licensing authority has to conduct an application under section 51 and 52 of the Licensing Act 2003 in respect of the Gardener's Arms Public House, 103 York Hill, Loughton. The application has been treated on its own merits, and this subcommittee has taken its decision based on the application for a licence review, the policy of the licensing authority, the relevant representations received, guidance issued, and the licensing objectives. The decision of this subcommittee, after considering the representations made in support and against the application, is that the conditions of the premises licence are added to and modified as follows. Customers are not permitted to take drinks outside the pub or to consume alcohol in any external area, save for a maximum of 30 people seated at tables within the horseshoe area only, and tables and chairs shall be removed from other outdoor areas. The outside areas of the premises are to be cleared of customers by 2100 hours. After 2100 hours, customers shall only be permitted to be in the outside of the premises for smoking. No music shall be played in the outside area of the premises, and under section 177A of the Licensing Act 2003, this condition shall apply during the deregulated hours for regulated entertainment. A noise limiter must be fitted to the musical amplification system and maintained in accordance with the following criteria. The limiter must be set at a level as advised by an authorised community resilience team officer. The operational panel of the noise limiter should then be secured by key or password to the satisfaction of the authorised officer, and access shall only be by persons authorised by the premises licence holder. The limiter shall not be altered without prior written agreement from the community resilience team. No alteration or modification to any existing sound system should be effected without prior knowledge of the community resilience team, and no additional sound generating equipment shall be used on the premises without being routed through the sound limiter device. Loudspeakers should not be located in the entrance and exit of the premises or outside the building. The premises shall install and maintain a comprehensive CCTV system where all entry and exit points will be covered, enabling frontal identification of every person entering in any light condition. The CCTV system shall continually record while the premises is open for licensable activities and during all times when customers remain on the premises, and will include the external area immediately outside the premises entrance. The external cameras shall also record audio as well as video. All recordings shall be stored for a minimum period of 28 days with date and time stamping. Viewing of recordings shall be made available immediately upon the request of police or authorised officers throughout the entire 28-day period. A staff member from the premises who is conversant with the operation of the CCTV system shall be on the premises at all times when the premises is open. This staff member must be able to provide a police or authorised council officer copies of recent CCTV images or data with the absolute minimum of delay when requested. A written dispersal policy shall be in place and implemented at the premises to move customers from the premises and the immediate vicinity in such a way as to cause minimum disturbance or nuisance to neighbours. The dispersal policy must be agreed in writing with the community resilience team and subject to regular review at a minimum of 6 monthly intervals. Members of staff shall ask customers sat on the horseshoe area of the premises who are excessively loud, shouting, yelling or screaming to be mindful of neighbouring residential properties and be required to leave the premises if they fail to do so. Signage shall be displayed at all exits from the premises and external areas, requesting customers to be considerate of residents and to keep nuisance to a minimum. No glasses or open bottles are to be removed from the premises by customers. Our reasons are that in spite of attempts made by the Council's Community Resilience team to engage with the former designated premises supervisor and the premises management, offering guidance and support, the number of complaints has continued to increase, and they have witnessed the breach of the noise abatement notice, community protection warning and premises licence conditions on numerous occasions. The former designated premises supervisor has been aware of the issues and complaints and has continuously failed to take appropriate action to comply with the conditions of the licence and notices and to act responsibly to minimise disruption for surrounding residents. The additional conditions are therefore appropriate and proportionate for the prevention of public nuisance. Notwithstanding the recent change of the DPS, we still believe that our decision is appropriate and proportionate. Parties to hearings have a right to appeal against decisions of the licensing authority to the Magistrates' Court within 21 days, beginning with the date when the appellant is notified by the licensing authority of its decision. This will be signed by the chairman and handed to the licensing officers, who will send out the appropriate confirmation of this in writing. Thank you. Pardon? Mr. King, how quickly will this be sent out?
As soon as possible, as soon as we get the decision notice, we'll start.
Next couple of days, tomorrow or next couple of days.
It's not working, sorry, it's working.
Yeah, as soon as we get the decision notice, Chair, then we'll start working on the letter, so it will be next couple of days.
I wonder if I could clarify just two matters. Firstly, regarding outside smokers after 9 p.m. Was consideration given to restricting it to 6 persons?
No.
No consideration was given, or?
Consideration. Not working. Consideration was given. consideration was given, but it was decided not to include the number.
Cast. Okay. The second matter is this. Now, we're all describing the Horseshoe Terrace area, and I think we all know what that means from the photos. But to avoid any confusion, would it make sense to actually mark that area on a plan? And if we could be provided with the licence plan, we can actually perhaps shade that area so there's no future confusion as to where that begins and ends.
Yeah, I think our licensing team will be able to do that when they send out the letter.
Okay. One moment, please, miss. Hand down.
Sorry, it may be advisable if there's a new plan, because the plan we have is the original, dating back quite a few years. So I think the actual layout's changed slightly. So I don't know if you have a new plan. Have you got any?
Are you speaking to this?
Yeah, Tracy.
Just, well, I think you can sort that out between you, all right? Can you know what?
So sorry, just to clarify, you want to highlight in red the horseshoe area?
Just a hatched area on the plan that delineates where the Horseshoe Terrace area is, to save confusion or creep into the forecourt area. It may be if that's perhaps drafted by one of your officers, that can be sent both to the operator of the pub and perhaps to us, just to make sure everyone's, and you, to make sure you're happy with it.
I'm sure our licensing officers can look into that and put
Thank you.
a mark.
And finally, I think just from all parties to thank you for your careful consideration of all the evidence.
Well, thank you all for your attendance. I'm sorry it's taken a long while, but it's a very big decision to make. And declare the meeting closed.